Experience is the key to learning. Whether that experience is actual or virtual is irrelevant. Learning is the key to consciousness evolution. Experience, operational memory and I11 interpretive processing, perception, data cole. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 45 I 415. Lection, Free Will, Choice, and the Ability to Learn, Information Processing Developing Results and Conclusions, and Grow, Self-Modification Relative to Profitability Goals, are fundamental attributes of successfully evolving consciousness. Compare that last sentence with the descriptions given in chapters 24 through 28 of Book 1 and especially the beginning of Chapter 7 of this book, where memory array of challenging data exchanges, interactions, between the entity and its internal and external environments, self-aware information processing, and self-modification in pursuit of profitability were given as the fundamental attributes of consciousness. In Chapter 7, these fundamental characteristics of consciousness were used to define consciousness and to describe its evolutionary process in general terms. Now it becomes clear that an experiential virtual reality like PMR facilitates consciousness evolution by thoroughly and methodically exercising each of its four fundamental characteristics. PMR learning labs are well designed by evolution to accomplish their purpose. They deliver exactly what we need to optimize our opportunities for self-improvement. Free will, the ability to make choices in order to effect self-modification in the pursuit of evolutionary profitability, is part of the definition of consciousness itself. Free will is not an outside condition that must be applied to consciousness, it is fundamental to the existence of consciousness. Free will is a necessary attribute of successfully evolving consciousness. Without free will, a profitable consciousness system is impossible. If you and your many sentient friends and acquaintances are conscious, consciousness must not only exist but also support a complex interactive system of coherent experience. Given that consciousness exists, it must be enabled by memory, information processing capability, intelligence, the interactive sharing of data and free will choice making in the service of profitable evolution. Thus, the question of free will reduces to the question of are you conscious, and, if so, is your consciousness part of a complex interactive system of consciousness? If these are answered in the affirmative, then your consciousness, and the system of which it is a part, must be evolving against some measure of profitability because that is a requirement of all self-modifying interactive systems. Such a system cannot evolve toward greater profitability without free will to make the required choices. Evolution requires choice between alternatives. For evolution to exist as a real process, the choices must be free. Pseudo-free is free enough within a sufficiently complex, interactive, feedback-driven subsystem for the fundamental process to be effective within that subsystem. To illustrate my point, I am going to put you to work. Contemplate the consciousness of a clam or a bumblebee. Next, compare that consciousness with the consciousness of a future generation computer. Goodness gracious, great balls of fire, when you accomplished that task in only a few seconds, I must say, I am mightily impressed. The depth and speed of your cogitation are truly remarkable, undoubtedly, a phenomenon worth studying all by itself. Did you list all of the functional similarities and differences? 416 I my big toe I mind, brain and body. Did you notice how the list of functional differences becomes shorter and shorter the more you ponder the fundamentals of consciousness and its quality? In the areas of intent process and structure there are vast differences, but these have less to do with the basic properties of consciousness and free will than with the particular mechanisms and forms of consciousness implementation. Next, examine the free will of that clam or bumblebee. Clams and bumblebees have many daily choices and decisions to make. As well, and they live and die, grow or evolve, by the cumulative results of those choices as we do. How predictable are clams? I suspect their individual deliberate actions are spread over a statistical range that represents the decision space of their species. Humans similarly exercise free will within their own decision space. The size and complexity of that decision space, for a species or an individual depends on the capacity and quality, entropy, of the consciousness that supports it. For a given fundamental capacity, lower entropy supports a larger, more complex decision space. Higher capacity also supports the potentiality of lower entropy. In case you are wondering, the capacity of the human consciousness is immense, yet we exercise only an infinitesimal fraction of one-half capacity. Our potential ranges far beyond your wildest dreams. Unfortunately, the part of that potential we have intentionally actualized typically supports little more than the tedious soap opera we call real life. That's right, beings with a higher quality of consciousness function in a larger decision space with a larger range of free will choices. They live in a larger, upscale reality. The reality in which their awareness functions is a superset of the reality experienced by a consciousness with higher entropy. That is an obvious conclusion when comparing yourself to a clam, and much less obvious when comparing yourself to a being of exceptionally high quality consciousness, although the relative gaps are likely to be about the same. Most of us have little appreciation for the depth and breadth of our ignorance. You are necessarily unaware of what you are unaware of. Some of us may even feel grateful for the merciful oblivion granted by that obvious fact of sentient existence. However, let me remind you that ignorance is bliss only in the service of maintaining a happily deluded ego. In all circumstances, ignorance, and the beliefs it generates, is a constraint upon vision, a limiter of awareness, a prison wall that prevents awareness from expanding beyond its present boundary, and is a great destroyer of potential. I detect a look of worried consternation. Yes, the awareness gaps mentioned above actually are about the same, but hey, relax, unwrinkle that brow, there is no point worrying over what you don't know. The clams don't get it either. And as everyone knows, clams are, well, happy as clams. Big pictures are inherently difficult to see from the perspective of little pictures. Far out unexpected, out-of-the-box paradigm shifts are always required. Oh no, don't look so disheartened, it is not impossible, just challenging. The fact that transcending belief. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 45 I 417. And expanding your awareness is difficult to accomplish is not a bad thing. In fact, it is a necessary feature of all successful consciousness systems. Undoubtedly, you see the virtue in restricting those dimwit clams to experiences that they can deal with and learn from. Anything else would either go over their mushy little heads or greatly confuse them. How would you like to get mugged at the beach by a bed of psychic clams from hell trying to exploit everything on the planet as well as each other? The non-negotiable requirements of consciousness evolution to earn your own way and pull yourself up by your own bootstraps are absolutely necessary to ensure that quality, power, and responsibility have the opportunity to develop together. You feel immense relief at knowing there is a self-balancing merit system that keeps those brazen bivalves in their proper place? Geez, the thought of a pack of wild clams watching sitcorns on TV, guzzling beer, and cruising the urban kelp beds in search of junk food sends cold chills up and down my spine. Can clams and bumblebees learn, modify their actions and intents through experience? Of course they can learn. Using memory, processing, and feedback to achieve self-modification, in reaction to internal and external environments, lies at the heart of our definition of consciousness. Consciousness has the natural, innate capacity to learn. Learning is purposeful self-modification created by the exercise of a free will that utilizes memory, processing, and feedback within a complex interactive environment. Learning, evolution, and growth, the steady decreasing of entropy, is impossible without the functional condition or attribute that we call free will. Are you beginning to see that free will, learning and evolutionary growth opportunities are natural and necessary attributes of an evolving individuated consciousness? Consciousness cannot exist without the ability to make self-determined self-modifying choices. Without free will, there is no consciousness. Without consciousness, there is no free will. Consciousness and free will cannot be separated, they are simply different aspects of the same thing. We shall see that it is our narrow, beginningless, PMR-centric concept of causality coupled with our misunderstanding of the properties of consciousness reality that tricks scientists and philosophers into believing that free will is logically separable from consciousness. The concept of evolving consciousness without free will is a mistaken and illogical theoretical construct that set destructs in static, meaningless, determinism. The unintentional, but usually implicit, assumption of dead, directionless, non-growing, non-evolving, purposeless, non-living, consciousness creates a conceptual sinkhole, a philosophical dead end. A deterministic reality model can logically only chase its own tail. Though self-consistent, it leads nowhere and produces no useful output because its implicit little picture assumptions are fundamentally flawed in the big picture where consciousness lives, grows, and evolves. Let's look at free will from an evolutionary perspective. Consider that evolution can increase the capability of an individual or species only within the limits of the natural. 418 my big toe I mind, brain and body. Capacity of that individual or species. A free will needs only to be free enough to make choices within its own local logical system and decision space. Within its local reality system, a sentient entity must be free to make choices that directly affect future choices. Note that complex interactive environments, intent, memory, processing power, feedback, and self-modification are the enabling mechanisms of both free will and consciousness. Free will and consciousness co-evolve as mutually reinforcing aspects of the same system thing. Free will evolves as a natural and necessary attribute of living consciousness. Only consciousness systems that evolve a practical implementation of free will can continue to progress towards some measure of greater personal profitability. Without a measure of cumulative profitability, self-improvement, there can be no evolution or progress. Dead consciousness would never evolve or progress, it could accomplish nothing, not even existence. Beginningless little picture logic, see Chapter 18, Book 1, may grant theoretical existence to a deterministic dead consciousness that comes from nowhere and goes nowhere, but a larger view that better understands the origins and properties of consciousness realizes that dead and non-existent are logically equivalent when applied to consciousness. Consciousness integrated with a free will is how the organism must evolve in order to evolve at all. Free will is inherent to our governing rule set. It is the nature of evolving consciousness, or evolving anything, to make specific choices from billions of available possibilities. Results reflect massive complex interaction, ever-changing self-modifying feedback loops, and are accumulative. Learning takes place relative to the choices made. Look around, that scheme represents the fundamental nature of individual and collective sentient entities. That all sentient entities seem to reflect the fundamental properties and processes of evolving consciousness is an important data point to consider. A consciousness system containing many individuated units is similar to a body of cells or an internet composed of billions of individual computers. No one in particular is in control. Choices are made, information packets go here or there. Results are the aggregate of a billion independent and interdependent decisions. These results drive further decisions which drive a further results. No individual plans it or controls it or runs it. It changes and evolves on its own according to its capacity, its environment, and the constraints placed upon it. The individual decisions and choices of each cell, internet user, or consciousness unit are made according to immediate self-interest, however self-interest is defined or perceived at that moment. Free will is inherent to each cell, internet user, or unit of individuated consciousness. The decision space may be relatively small at the cellular level, but if there is sentience, there is also a finite decision space to support the existence and functioning of that sentience. Consciousness and free will go together like inhaling and exhaling, like mammals and sexuality, like a chickens and eggs. Like birth, life, and death, consciousness on free. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 45 I 419. Will represent a practical combination of attributes necessary for the balanced functioning of a real, as opposed to theoretical, evolving system. Our free will does not need to come from some theoretical consideration or independent process, it is simply part of the system, inherent to the existence and processes of evolving consciousness. The rule set that defines our local reality must necessarily express free will because that is how choice-making evolving consciousness operates. If one conceives of free will as being theoretically derived from some independent random process, a circular logic trap is created. Recall Chapter 18, Book 1 where we discussed the PMR belief that everything must be caused by something else, no beginnings are allowed. This belief logically forces us to account for the independent existence of the egg before we can allow the possibility of the chicken, or vice versa. So, which came first, the chicken or the egg? The question itself carries the assumption of a causality that eliminates the possibility of a constructive logical answer. From a larger perspective, the answer is obvious. It is clear that neither came first, they evolved together, just like consciousness and free will. The appearance of a logical problem is created by an illogical question. Don't get caught up unproductively in the chicken versus egg logical tail chase. It may appear to be a great mystery, but is only a misguided question based upon a poor understanding of the logical requirements of beginnings and the inappropriate application of the little picture's objective causality. See Chapter 18, Book 1. Scientists, philosophers, and theologians should resist looking for a process that creates free will, or equivalently, eliminates determinism. That bucket has a hole in it. Free will does not have to be constructed out of smaller parts, or derived through a controlled analytic process, that represents a typically PMR little picture misunderstanding based upon a belief in causal processes that cannot logically support beginnings. Chickens before eggs? Eggs before chickens? Do you see the flawed logic that makes these questions a pair deep instead of dumb? It is a similarly flawed logic that supports the concept of determinism by evoking a little picture causality that is devoid of an appreciation of a larger reality which is based upon dynamically evolving consciousness. So, which came first, consciousness or free will? Do we conclude from our little picture logic that neither can exist? That sums up the position of contemporary science and philosophy. Mind is nothing beyond physical brains and biochemistry. All reality is physical, and all information is theoretically knowable and eventually predictable. That these beliefs run counter to the carefully collected data of everyday experience, are inconsistent with each other, and do not make good scientific sense is conveniently overlooked to appease the demands of little picture causality in particular, and scientific dogma in general. With an open mind and fresh vision, it is not difficult to see that most scientists and philosophers too for that matter, have employed cultural belief and professional dogma. 420 my big TOE mind, brain and body. To paint themselves into an intellectual corner. That free will and consciousness must evolve together as natural and necessary attributes of any successfully evolving sentient energy form is a thesis that solves many outstanding problems of science and philosophy. Apply this concept to a sufficiently complex digital energy form like AUO and you get AUMNU, along with a lifetime guarantee of free daycare and preschool services within PMR. You know what is said about cornered critters being particularly dangerous. Every word of it is true, and I would be remiss if I did not also warn you. Be careful, your professional and personal credibility can be savagely attacked and badly bitten by a vicious and tenacious dogma. In fact, most organizations and academic institutions, with fine reputations to uphold, have guard dogmas patrolling their halls. These old, mean-tempered, intimidating, politically powerful creatures are entrusted with enforcing a conceptual correctness that everyone who is important can be proud of. In the high-entropy real world of PMR where ego politics powers almost every nuance of every activity, you need to learn to apply gentle soothing strokes, scratch them behind the ears, and always carry an extra hot dog in your pocket. Perhaps fighting fire with fire is a good idea in some circumstances, but combating ego with ego in a dogma fight is always a disaster for everyone involved. Our conceptual limitations often generate teleological contradictions. Mind-matter wave-particle duality, and entangled pairs fall into the same causality confused basket. The big picture expresses the true nature of reality, while the little picture expresses the shared delusion of a group of individuated consciousnesses enrolled in the PMR Learning Lab. This concept is developed more thoroughly in sections 4 and 5. The conflicts and paradoxes you see are not real and do not exist in the big picture. Logical conflicts and paradoxes appear to exist within the little picture view because of the erroneous assumptions of little picture science. An analog: the professional magician only appears to saw the lovely lady in half. Spending your nights worrying about the apparent impossibility of the lady paradox, how ladies can be sawed in half and then be put back together again, and concocting complex theories of tissue microfusion are generally non-productive and will never yield a satisfactory solution because the obviously correct, I saw it with my own eyes, assumptions the magician, your culture, has led you to believe are, in fact, wrong. When our belief in PMR scientific causality dramatically fails before our eyes, we have a tendency to build up elaborate theoretical structures to maintain our belief and save the sacred dogma of traditional objective science. Resist the urge to make free will or psi more complicated than they are. It is not that you have consciousness, but that you are consciousness. Determinism is a philosophically unproductive, unworkable theoretical possibility based upon omniscience or perfect life process for everything everywhere. It has no supporting real data and is generally based upon religious dogma, God knows every. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 45 I 421. Thing, or erroneous little picture assumptions, scientific dogma. Science knows, or can know, everything. Without free will, consciousness is not consciousness, it is merely purposeless process. It is theoretically impossible to take the wetness out of liquid water or the coldness, relative to standard room temperature, out of ice. Consciousness without free will is like warm ice or dry liquid water. The concept of consciousness without free will creates a logical inconsistency. Because we of limited PMR vision do not appreciate the nature of consciousness, we separate the concept of free will from consciousness and try to give it a causality, an independent theoretical basis. The result is that we end up chasing our logical tail to conclusions that run directly counter to our everyday experience of individual consciousness. Because of our little picture perspective, we project our PMR sense of finite knowledge into a theoretical assumption of omniscience, which eliminates free will and reduces consciousness to an analytical PMR physics or computer science problem. After that we are stuck with nowhere to go. No growth, no choice, no intent, no evolution, no personal consciousness, no purpose, no point. Determinism rules the land of limited dead knowledge. A complex consciousness ecosystem designed by evolution to be simultaneously out of control, in balance, and in a continual state of redefining itself leaves omniscience theoretically impossible. The egg cannot logically exist without a prior chicken, and the chicken cannot logically exist without a prior egg, therefore, it is logically, given the implicit assumptions, impossible for either to exist. In terms of chickens and eggs, that conclusion is as dumb as it is logical. One might say that this conclusion is locally logical within the restricted solution space where the assumptions hold. In terms of consciousness, free will, and determinism, a similarly flawed process appears to provide an acceptable solution for many techies who have no logical way to derive a separate free will from the local causality of PMR. Let's talk a moment about the implementation of free will within a local reality. Recall that a local reality is a unique dimension of existence and interaction, a computational subset, within the AUM system. That a local free will must be generated by a more fundamental digital consciousness system does not negate the effectiveness or functionality of that free will at the local level. A digital system can meet all of the requirements of a locally functioning free will operating within a restricted subset of the digital system. From the local perspective, the free will to express yourself, to exercise your consciousness quality, by choosing from the finite array of discrete possibilities that exist within your decision space is actual, effective, and real. That this self-modifying educational process is derived from a larger, more complex digital algorithmic system is of no consequence to the efficacy of the local choice-making process that enables unique evolution, growth, change, and learning within the local system. 422 My big toe I mind, brain and body. Each conscious entity is exercising its free will to make choices within its own limit reality. Each knows little to nothing of what lies beyond. Think about each entity's free will in terms of practical operational requirements. Whether an entity is bright or dim, carbon-based, silicon-based, or reality cell-based, RT must make unique intent-guided choices within its operative finite decision space in order to find more profitable ways of existing and doing business. An operational free will is based upon each entity's specific memory, processing capability and past and present input data, experience. Experience data are gleaned over time from the entity's perception of their internal and external environments. Think of free will as a practical evolutionary device of consciousness rather than a theoretical process of thwarting determinism with true randomness. Functional free will, at whatever level of application, requires no more than the practical ability to make intent-based choices where the intent is a function of the quality of the consciousness making the choice. Such a mechanism for making profitable choices at the local level, perhaps based on an evaluation of past choices, can be arranged. Consciousness can provide the instrument for its own evolution. At the local level where action is taken, an entity's decision space is defined by a finite set of discrete choices. Theoretical applications of randomness at the top level, consciousness evolving to be unable to look at the details of its own processes or the invention of perfect or good enough random number generators, are not relevant to the immensely complex, interactive, self-modifying, evolutionary processes taking place within local realities such as PMR. Let's take a short break. I detect a few eyes beginning to glaze over and a head or two bobbing uncontrollably in the back row. Everyone. Up. 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 Yes, that means you too, get on up, and push that chair back. That's right, stand up, stretch up straight and tall, that's it. Now wait. Just a minute until everyone is up. Come on Jake, get up, you must join us. Now, hop vigorously on one foot while practicing your best and loudest Tarzan yell. Go on, hop 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 hop, hop louder. Louder, that's it, make Jane proud. Don't worry about what the people around you will think, you are about to give them a great learning opportunity to practice compassion. As soon as you are done hopping and yelling, drop 2 ice cubes in your shirt, and you are into extreme sports, drop 1 in your underwear as well. When they have melted, sit down. Phew. Wow. Didn't that feel great? That is Uncle Tom's patented wake-up technique, guaranteed to work every time. If you actually bought this book with your own money, you have my full unrestricted permission to use this technique anytime you want to, one of the many benefits of big toe ownership that accrue to you because of your wise choice of reading material. We are almost done, so hang in there a while longer and you. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 45 I 423. Might learn something useful. Don't look at me like that, you never can tell, it could happen. Perfect knowledge, the omniscience needed to support determinism, does not, will not, evolve because it is not a practical possibility within real, interactive, self-modifying systems that are large and complex. From the perspective of evolution, a stagnant determinism is not profitable to the system. Set improvement, learning, and meaningful goal-directed growth are profitable to the system, and these, by definition, cannot exist within a deterministic system. The meaningless random results of meaningless random processes can produce no increase in cumulative profitability. Such a system cannot support the properties and quality of consciousness as we experience it. An evolving consciousness system like ours cannot be supported by either a wholly random or a wholly deterministic system because there can be no cumulative profitability in either. Are you beginning to see the connection between free will and our 2 basic assumptions, consciousness and evolution? See Chapter 24, Book 1. Given the dynamic duo of consciousness and evolution as we have described them, free will falls out as a necessary logical result of their interaction. It is not an added ingredient that somehow must be accounted for. Free will is simply the result of consciousness energy and evolutionary process slipping into bed together for a joyous moment of creation that has not yet ended. From that union, all reality and existence flows. Two basic assumptions not only allow and account for free will, but logically demand it and then create it out of a successful synergistic interaction. Theoretical omniscience is meaningless within a real evolving consciousness system. Because real systems come into existence through profitable evolution, those that do not have the design, rule base, or structural processes to evolve toward being more and more useful and profitable to themselves go nowhere, they do not grow or become more. Instead, they become stuck in an unfocused, meaningless, unguided, unprofitable process, whether random or deterministic, that can never actually form into a real system. They do not become. They remain high entropy nothingness or represent inert meaningless process. Evolution cannot progress them forward toward greater profitability. As rejects of evolution, they go away, die, and disappear unable to maintain a coherent existence. Incoherent existence cannot persist or converge to a working system. By definition it must dissolve as easily and readily as it forms. A consciousness system evolves, increases its profitability, by decreasing its entropy. By definition, randomness and determinism can have no long-term goal, point, purpose, or profitability. No successful, real, working, dynamic, system can be generated under these conditions. All of reality, as far as we can know it from the data gathered thus far, fits the form of an evolving consciousness system that has obvious rules, focus, and purpose. Growth toward greater profitability permeates all existence. There is no indication that 424 I my big toe I mind, brain and body. Existence is either random or without dynamic purposeful profitability. However, there is a preponderance of circumstantial evidence to the contrary. If you have no experience of PMR's purposefulness or of the attributes of consciousness, even if you are totally without knowledge of your greater purpose and completely distrustful of your intuition and subjective knowledge, still, you can find no indicator pointing to a random, static, or deterministic reality. Construing ignorance of purpose as purposelessness is a logical error. Existentialism made this error because although it clearly saw the crippling limitations of many little picture belief systems, it was unable to transcend its own little picture belief in a universal causality. With no beginning, understanding of consciousness and our connection to it, and no end, evolutionary purpose of consciousness, existentialists are left drifting and rudderless. Consciousness and free will are of the same evolutionary root. Like the trunk and branches of a single tree, they must grow together, inseparably joined and successfully evolving as one entity. The system of free will and consciousness evolution works because it was designed, has evolved, to work. The rules of the game of evolutionary success define it into existency and maintain its integrity. With respect to big PMR-based digital simulations, war games or meteorological modeling, for example, the people who build and use these simulations do not know how the results are going to turn out. If they did, there would be no need to develop or run the computer models. Should AUM be any different? The complexity of these simulations as well as the modeled randomness, is what makes the results, output, unpredictable, for a given set of input values, and useful. Let's have some fun and strain our brains a little. Imagine that some simulation uses billions of neural nets and fuzzy logic and lots of other nonlinear self-modifying imprecise functions we haven't invented yet. Let 2 be a billion times larger and more interactive among its objects than whatever it is you can possibly imagine. Let each object be allocated its own unique memory, processing capability, and set of multi-layered, system goals and personal goals, profitability algorithms, some of which are self-modifiable. Perhaps every object interacts in very complex and conditional ways, with some uncertainty or ambiguity tossed in with every other object. Also, let billions of intermediate outputs of the simulation automatically modify the simulation's inputs towards some larger purpose, winning the war or predicting the weather, and you will have the tiniest sliver of a shadow of one small calculation space, reality dimension, within TBC. Next, change the random number seed and vary all input values that are expected. TOE have some intrinsic variation or ambiguity. You might also want to modify some of the distributions that define the operational properties of specific statistical activity as the simulation runs in order to create specific situations or conditions of interest. Implementing these changes on the fly may dramatically alter both final and intermay. 1 http://www.my-big-toe.com Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 45 I-425. Diary results. Implement all such changes in a systematic and clever way over many iterations, like parametric analysis, and perhaps the collective results will form an exceptionally meaningful statistical ensemble. Perhaps the simulation will run for such a long time that it will seem like forever to the individual objects who keep timely counting their own processing cycles. Consider that many of the objects could exhibit the four attributes of consciousness and have limited access to each other's data. They may pass data back and forth interacting, making free will choices, with each other according to their goals, self-modified defining algorithms, and within the bounds of their shared reality defining rule set. One higher level goal may be, for example, to lower the entropy of their individual assigned calculation space. Contemplate the advantages to AUM of an entire set of independently seated PMRs. This is only a start. This game can go on and on. I am sure your imagination can raise this hypothetical simulation to higher levels of complex and meaningful interaction. I simply wanted to get you started and to help you imagine a dim glimmer of the origin of the free will needed to support profitable choice making within a limited local reality. Free will is part of the consciousness evolution game in the PMR Learning Lab. The free will consciousness evolution interaction is only required to be a practical process. A functional way to derive profitable, convergent evolution from local experience. Free will does not need a separate theoretical basis. For us, it is a practical methodology for growing consciousness quality, lowering consciousness entropy, in local realities. For a local consciousness system such as PMR, a locally derived pseudo-free will that supports intent-guided choice and feedback within the available decision space of each individual is necessary and sufficient. In our big simulations, we use similar processes to gain insight and knowledge by employing pseudo-randomers to add a greater sense of reality to our simulations. This randomness actually adds accuracy to our calculations because within our reality choice making and ambiguity are natural attributes of both sentient and non-sentient entities. We believe that we use randomness in our simulations to make up for our ignorance, to fill in for the details we cannot easily express analytically. What we do not realize is that our ignorance runs much deeper and is more fundamental than we suspect. We think, because of our little picture perspective and belief in a beginningless causal ity, that perfect knowledge is theoretically obtainable and that it would necessarily produce a determinism. A better understanding of the bigger picture points out the theoretical and the practical impossibility of perfect or complete knowledge within an evolving consciousness system. The highest fidelity model must contain randomness. Quantum mechanics bothered many scientists, including Albert Einstein, because it seemed to posit a statistical basis for our reality. It seemed obvious that sentient beings and their reality were fundamentally more real, solid, and dependable than could be attributed to a statistical representation. However, when you understand the digital 426 my big toe mind, brain and body nature of consciousness, realize that PMR exists within a calculational subspace, dimension of reality, of TBC, know that we physically interact according to a shared rule set that defines the perceptions of our individuated digital consciousness, and appreciate the interactive nature of intent, free will, and choice making that leads to entropy reduction in complex systems. It is not at all surprising that our fundamentally digital mathematical rule-based perception of existence should display statistics at its root. The surprise would be if anything other than digital, quantized statistical entities were found at the most fundamental level of our reality. We have just learned that individual free will is also an expression of a necessary condition for the evolution of consciousness. The PMR Learning Lab is defined into useful existence by its rule set, which determines perception, awareness, and causality. Causality defines the logical relationships and allowable interactions between various objects within a local reality or given dimension. The PMR space-time rule set constrains the consciousness of those particular individuated units participating in PMR to experience only what the rule set determines to be appropriate for the efficient functioning of that particular reality. Thus the PMR rule set appears to define and bound a limited knowledge within PMR. The illusion of determinism is the illusion that this rule set represents all reality and not merely the local calculation space, reality, or dimension of existence we call PMR. From the PMR perspective, our limitations, and the local space-time rule set that defines our causality team up to produce the illusion of determinism in order to provide us with an optimal environment for learning through experience. Efficient learning requires definite structure. A system without structure has no potential for profitable growth. Everyone knows that a lack of structure is antithetical to the successful development of children. Structure, by its nature, sets limits, or provides constraints. Optimizing your evolutionary opportunities requires the constraints of the PMR rule set. The appearance of a deterministic causality is the result of a limited understanding extrapolating the restrictions of an imposed local structure upon all of existence. By design, little picture knowledge appears, from the view of PMR, to be deterministic, an erroneous conclusion based upon the success of science in discovering more and more of the space-time rule set that defines our local PMR causality. However, there is more to the experience of PMR than the rule set that defines the possible interactions within PMR. We need to account for the experiencer as well as the logical constraints of the experience. PMR is a virtual reality that is designed to produce a certain type of constrained experience for the benefit of interactive units of individuated consciousness. Consciousness awareness is the active element that experiences the opportunity to exercise its intent as it interacts with virtual mass, energy, time, and other consciousness units that also possess free will. Only when mind and consciousness are assumed to be nothing other than PMR physical brain phenomena does PMR begin to appear totally deterministic to some. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 45 I 427. Philosophers and scientists. These folks believe that their conscious awareness is derived completely from a complex physical biocomputer, brain, which interacts with its physical environment. Not a bad guess, given the viewpoint from which it arises. I support the notion that computers can develop consciousness, but that is not the rationale behind this particular assumption. The assumption of a physically based consciousness is a logical requirement of the little picture it is made to maintain the belief that reality cannot be other than physical, that our causality is universal. Consciousness that is experienced within the PMR training simulator may appear to be brain-centered, but that connection is only a shadow on the wall of the PMR cave. Consciousness is the invisible media upon which your individuated awareness floats, much like the fish that cannot perceive the unchanging water it swims in, see Chapter 23, Book 1. The evolution of consciousness follows a greater purpose, logic, and causality that provide the key to a better, more productive understanding of both the little picture and the bigger picture. A non-physical consciousness-based big picture aerial ity enables the full range of our accumulated human experience to make good sense within a single integrated and coherent theoretical structure. The traditional little physical picture model of reality creates as many big picture paradoxes and problems as it offers little picture solutions. By comparison, a deterministic little physical picture model of reality creates additional big picture paradoxes and problems while offering few, if any, new solutions. These paradoxes and problems are traditionally dealt with by stretching old belief systems and establishing new ones. As always, beliefs are used to ease the anxiety of ignorance and make our knowledge seem more complete than it is. The little physical picture model of reality has been unable to produce a little TOE that unifies our understanding of the space-time rule set that defines PMR causality, much less produce a satisfactory big TOE that not only fully explains little picture space-time causality, but also explains the greater human experience as well. Given the algorithmic digital nature of the space-time rule set, a little TOE may or may not exist. However, a big TOE that solves profound contemporary problems of philosophy, metaphysics, and physics all at the same time and with a known overarching theory must exist because we are here and are as we are. Our existence and human nature exhibit clear universal patterns that contain much more consistency and direction than randomness, a fact that must have a holistic comprehensible explanation at its core. Because our existence is about us, about who, what, and why we are, surely the explanation lies accessible within us. However, until it becomes clear that a non-mathematical logical analysis of the origins of free will, consciousness, spirituality, or paranormal events could potentially represent accurate and honest science, that explanation will forever remain beyond your grasp. Some may feel that philosophy and metaphysics do not pose real or legitimate problems because their solutions lie outside science and are therefore impossible to solve. 428 My big TOE mind, brain and body. Analytically. Bullpucky. These problems yield to accurate knowledge the same as any other. The difficulty is not that logical scientific solutions are impossible. The difficulty is that a self-limiting belief-based science inadvertently makes it impossible to comprehend the correct answer. Science has the mission to pursue knowledge leading to a better, more profitable understanding of the natural world, not merely the slice that falls within the confines of its traditional belief systems. Discovering fundamental truth and developing useful solutions are what science is all about. To find truth you must go wherever it leads. Belief-blinded closed-minded individuals who travel the path of least resistance and derive their respectability from supporting the beliefs held in common by their peers choose the safety of the herd over the ability to discover big truth. To maintain that respectability and the ego and material rewards that come with it, these individuals give up the ability to understand what is critically important to them and to their professions. A sad story of self-inflicted wounds which is so common that it defines normalcy and sets the standard for professional success. Consciousness exists in many forms and at many levels, capacities, and scales, each built upon and extended from the others through the repetition of a simple process iterating its way toward an improved profitability. The result is a cascade of evolutionary creativity that aggressively explores all of the forms, configurations, and embodiments that consciousness systems can employ to improve their profitability. This energetic living complex pattern of evolving consciousness is what we have metaphorically referred to as the consciousness evolution fractal. It is the nature of fractal processes to generate monstrously big pictures by recursively applying a few basic rules and assumptions. It is a mistake for an entity within this vast reality fractal to believe its own tiny local reality subset of the greater consciousness ecosystem is the one, the only, the center, the pinnacle of creative expression. Individuals with little picture views can see nothing other than themselves emerging from the possibilities of existence. Such a limited vision produces not only a misplaced determinism but robs its owner of the knowledge he or she needs to actualize their personal potential. Only a failed and desperate theory, cultural, social, theological, or scientific, will feel the necessity to deny the existence of the facts it cannot explain. The facts of science, consciousness, free will, paranormal events, and the human spirit are left lying about everywhere. Open your eyes, explore them for yourself. They are not secrets, nor are they difficult to find once your mind is open to the possibilities. Let's make a quick connection between free will and psi phenomena. Both are part of our reality because they are natural attributes of consciousness. Free will must be part of our lit 11e picture experience because we are consciousness with the mission to evolve, and we cannot do that without the ability to make free choices. The free will inherent to consciousness must be fully operable in PMR or the learning lab would be. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 45 I 429. Unable to support learning. Likewise, psi effects must be largely constrained in PMR or the effectiveness of the learning lab will quickly degenerate. The uncertainty principle is the mechanism for maintaining that particular growth optimizing balance. Everything has its purpose. A local deterministic causality reflecting the PMR rule set is required to provide the overall structure within which our experience can be profitably defined and coherently generated. An effective educational opportunity that encourages consciousness to evolve must engage free will, limit serious side to those who are likely to use it in pursuit of consciousness quality, and provide the structure of an apparently objective rule-based causality to rationalize experience. We will more carefully define psi effects and their relationship to consciousness and consciousness quality, as well as introduce the psi uncertainty principle in chapters 13 and 14 of this book. At the experiential level, imagine epiphenomena as a brightly colored flower enticing those who have some potential to profitably understand it, and as a prickly, scary, or ridiculous weed to most others. Anyone can experience psi phenomena or psi effects. Many can wield a shadow of its power, but only those who understand it deeply can effectively use it as a springboard to significantly reduce their personal entropy and the entropy of the system of which they are a part. Let's get more specific by defining psi effect as an acausal, outside PMR causal ity, phenomenon that is attributable to the operations of consciousness. From this more technical definition, let's explore a few semantic twists and turns. One could argue that free will is a psi effect because free will and psi effects are fundamental, interdependent attributes of consciousness. Similarly, describing or defining consciousness simply as psi can be supported from a general conceptual perspective. A free will effect is a psi effect is a consciousness effect. Consciousness is the energy system from which our reality is created. For us, consciousness is the root of all reality. What we call psi effects and free will are direct expressions of the fundamental attributes of that consciousness system and of how that system operates and evolves. If you want to know whether or not you have free will, simply ask yourself whether or not you are conscious. If the answer is yes, you have free will. If the answer is no, you are probably a lawyer and have simply confused the word conscious with conscience. If after consulting a dictionary, the answer is still no, you must be either a lawyer who has been elected to an important government position or an impressive professor, perhaps the dean of faculty, at a major university. In either case, put the book down very slowly, be careful not hurt yourself, and call your mother to come get you. She is probably very worried. All is consciousness. Consciousness is all. Do not think of NPMR and PMR as separate places with fixed mental pathways between them. That is a sometimes convenient, but misleading concept. The psi uncertainty principle, as a part of the PMR rule set, provides necessary structure to PMR by imposing limits. You cannot build a physical 430 my big toe I mind, brain and body, or non-physical bridge between PMR and NPMR. The physical bridge cannot be solidly connected to NPMR, and the non-physical bridge cannot be solidly connected to PMR. You are the bridge, which is why you cannot build one exterior to yourself. Consciousness is personal. You are an individuated unit of consciousness hallucinating a physical reality, perceiving a virtual physical reality. As such, you can, within the limits of your quality and ability, experience and apply free will and psi effects because you are consciousness. However, you cannot make your hallucination, virtual physical reality, exceed the limits and function of its defining rule set. Is this not as simple, elegant, and straightforward as a bowl of plum pudding? Oh, I see, you have never experienced a bowl of plum pudding. You are in luck. The next two sections will develop the recipe and cook up a yummy batch from scratch. We have once again jumped ahead of our story and taken an unsubstantiated peek into what lies ahead. However, you will find the logical development leading up to these unusual statements resides primarily in section 4, which is around the next corner. Furthermore, in sections 4 and 5, we will discuss the nature and the mechanics of experience, multiple PMRs, and local realities. To summarize, free will is a natural and necessary part of our consciousness. Without it there is no profitability, learning or growth, consciousness itself dissolves. Look around, outside and inside yourself, the data are clear. There is purpose and direction to everything. All existence is in a state of continual profit-based evolution. Our reality is large, complex, and interactive. Perfect knowledge leading to determinism is like the concept of dry liquid water, a practical impossibility born of an incomplete understanding. From the view of a lit 11e picture, causality determinism may seem scientifically logical as well as theoretically unavoidable as one approaches the limit of perfect knowledge within PMR. However, from a bigger picture we see only a local structure required to support the coherency of experience within a small subset of reality called PMR. Determinism is a local rule-based virtual reality illusion engineered within TBC for the purpose of optimizing consciousness evolution within the PMR learning lab. Determinism believes that you are a rule-based body hallucinating a consciousness with free will, when in fact, you are a consciousness with free will hallucinating a rule-based body. Once you see the big picture, by the end of section 5, you will understand that determinists, by definition, must be unconscious, an apparent paradox that is easily verified by logical analysis. If you, like me, have never lain awake at night worrying about the impossibility of true randomness in digital systems and what, if anything, that has to do with predestination and free will within a digital consciousness system, you didn't need to read this aside. However, if you read it anyway, be sure to ask your mother for an additional gold. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 45 I 431. Of course, that's assuming she didn't see you applying Uncle Tom's patented wake-up technique. If all you learned from this rather esoteric discussion is that a digital consciousness system can generate the free will we require to decrease the entropy of our personal consciousness, you got it all. Enough said. This particular point, though vitally important to many philosophers and scientists, is off the critical path to big picture understanding for most of us. I feel freer already. Now that the left half of our techie friends' brains are fully occupied with the interconnectedness of free will, PSI effects, and consciousness, and with the unexpected lack of determinism in the big digital picture, I think it would be beneficial for us to step up to a bigger picture of the bigger picture. Because most of us have been immersed in a detailed theoretical exposition of free will for the last half hour, now is a great time to take a broader view of where we are, and of the role our individual consciousness plays in the larger evolutionary drama. The next chapter does exactly that. Furthermore, you will be pleased to know it is also brief and contains no asides. In the preceding free will aside, we have been risking brain strain in order to lay out some of the infrastructure of the science of consciousness. Having accomplished that, we can now relax. Whenever possible, I avoid dragging my big toe through the conceptual weeds, but sometimes logical thoroughness and the details of process are necessary to support a general understanding. Though sharing some of the more technical theoretical details of my big toe is important and necessary, this trilogy is primarily focused on a big picture look at the big picture. In fact, any major new branch of science must begin its unfolding as a top-down big picture analysis of the pertinent data. New scientific paradigms generally begin at a broad conceptual level and then eventually move, over time, toward more specific applications. Such a top-down process often begins with the discovery of a more general relationship between common objects or events. Typically, the old paradigms become special cases of the new, applicable only under certain conditions. The basic conceptual foundation must be clearly laid out and thoroughly assimilated before the more traditional bottoms-up scientific approach can be constructed upon it. Only after scientists achieve a certain minimum level of basic understanding can they begin to profitably calculate and experiment their way toward a deep one and more productive knowledge. 432 My big toe mind, brain and body. Approaching a new understanding of reality by a bottoms-up application of the known tools of physics is like trying to chop down a mighty oak tree with an ice pick. A rather dull ice pick at that, because the assumptions of physics are thoroughly rooted in little picture causality. The broad sharp blade of an unfettered mind logically focused on the big picture of cause and effect is a much better wool for whacking swat ontological trees. As always, the proper approach implemented with the proper tools most readily finds success. The point is, the public message of my big toe is focused at developing T11E conceptual foundation upon which a more traditional future science will one day be based. You see, I have not written my big toe to frustrate and torture left-brain techies with incalculable generalities. The time for calculation has simply not yet arrived. At this point in the conceptual revolution presented by my big toe, everyone can come along on the journey. Scientists have no particular advantage over non-scientist 5 as long as I am careful not to couch my descriptions in Tidmo-jargon or be too techno-boring. In fact, at the front end of discovery, right brain ERS, and better yet, whole brainers have TL1E decided edge in leaping new paradigms in a single bound. Some patience is required. By the end of section 6, my big toe will have provided a rational, logically consistent theory of everything, developed the required new paradigms to support that theory, constructed a solid scientific foundation for future explorations to be built upon, and explained the interfaces and connections between newly derived knowledge and the existing database of scientific and personal experience. It will have subsumed physics, redeemed philosophy, and explained many public as well as private phenomena. A broad conceptual top-down exposition of the fundamentals of big-picture reality is where this train must start. If and when the big toe conceptual brain train begins to move and pick up speed, it will initiate the beginning of an independent outpouring of big toe science, social science, and philosophy that will begin to take root immediately, and slowly produce fruit over time at ever greater levels of specificity. That is how science moves from concept to application, very slowly, and with casts of thousands. Increment by increment, discovery by discovery, the more people who get involved and apply their brain power, the more quickly the train picks up speed. Once the ground is broken and the foundation laid, history tells us that many bright, open, and curious minds will begin to build upon it. Thus, as always, the ball evenly bounces back into your court. Perhaps your career or personal growth path, ability, or intuition will urge you to apply. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 45 I 433. These new understandings and paradigms to whatever commands your professional and personal attention. A significant number of readers are so moved, the time for public and private calculation and experimentation, developing and applying the detailed logical implications of this big toe, will arrive more quickly than anyone expects. Nevertheless, by evolutionary design, movement T0 profound shifts in widely held paradigms usually progresses slowly and with deliberate caution. Patience will always be a necessary virtue. Because the experience of consciousness is essentially a personal one, the private message of my big toe is for you, dearest reader, yes, just for you. The real power to effect significant positive change lies not with governments or professions, nor with science and the technology it spawns. The real power behind meaningful progress and growth, at any level of aggregation or organization, is the quality of the individual consciousnesses driving the action. Raising that quality can be accomplished only by the self-directed personal evolution of each individual. Clearly, the private message of my big toe is offered up for your personal use and benefit. II's potential value lies not in the words, nor in the ideas, presented. The potential of its value is the possibility of positively influencing the potential of your value, a potential that is profound and beyond estimation. 46. The chairman of the board, and our probable relative importance. It will be helpful to our overall big picture understanding if we can frame a more accurate and humble perspective about the nature of our reality and our place in it. Some, who for their own reasons, have not found a satisfying bigger picture within Iraqi doctrinal philosophy or religion, often posit an unknowable something such as the mind of God, Mach, as Stephen Hawking refers to the term at the end of his book, A Brief History of Time. Even something that is as expansive, open, and mystical as the mind of God usually represents only a little picture view of AUM because it is derived from RJ1E diminutive little picture perspective of God the CRE at R an animator of our physical universe. Let's review how our universe relates to the larger reality. In Chapter 33, Book 1, we pointed out that our universe occupies only a minuscule sliver of RJ1E available physical reality space within our own space-time dimension. Likewise, we will see in chapters 3, 9, and 10 of Book 3, that our local reality represents just one branch of many divergent probable realities. Recall there are many independent PMR-like realities that exist within NPMRN, which is itself only one of several more or less independent reality systems, one of the NPMRJ. The point is, our favorite PMR universe is not exact J at the core of the larger reality. In fact, its overall relative significance would appear to be almost infinitesimal when compared to the sheer bulk of all that is. AUM is thus chairman of the board and chief executive officer of Mach Corp, as well as the entire evolutionary experiment itself, substance, results, conclusions, and open-ended possibilities, all combined, and all at the same time. Continuing with 1 this decidedly funky. 436 I my big TOE the chairman of the board and our probable relative importance. But business-like metaphor, the big cheese is the division manager of N division, dedicated to a specific subset of evolutionary development models containing many PMRs. Progressing on down the chain of COMMAND, one eventually gets to a few assistants and their helpers who are concerned with our beloved OS and its inhabitants. Our physical universe is a subset of OS. Given that one or more of these low-level assistants directly concerned with the administration of OS applies for the job of God of PMR, then AUM would be the mind of the God of God's God. Yes, I am just having some fun, but you get TL1E point. If the Big Cheese's division is especially profitable, perhaps he will be promoted to junior vice president one day and be awarded a private space in which to park his mind, stock options, omniscience without looking, and a grand vacation he can get away, go out of his mind for a few weeks. What are you in this goof analogy? You, my friends, are the rank and file peons who appear, from your point of view, to do all the work and receive none of the credit, just as in real life. Perhaps getting the credit is not as important as NT first appears. In a light metaphoric moment, you could refer to AUM as TLL1 find of the God of God's God, but AUM is also much bigger than that. MOG is only one hat that, from our viewpoint, AUM appears to wear because of our minute perspective of the concepts of reality and God. That tiny perspective comes naturally, because we, us, our reality and history, are merely an itsy, bitsy, teeny, weeny yellowish polka dot on a much bigger picture that is itself wrapped around something more grand and sublime than we can imagine. Sorry, but we are not likely to be at the center of this bigger picture, the odds are clearly against it. We are not likely to be at the center of our PMR universe, much less the cent.er of our larger real ity, much less the Sendler of the Big Cheese's reality, and much less the Sendler of AUM's reality. Be realistic. We, our system, are important, but so are many other history threads running through other universes, in many other reality systems spread over many PMRs, which reside in the many NPMRs that exist within each of the many evolutionary manifestations of AUMLTSY, bitsy, teeny, weeny is probably an outrageous overstatement of our likely importance relative to the whole. We are, by the odds, statistically, likely to be much smaller than that. Even if we are more imponum than the statistics indicate, there is no advantage in knowing thal fact and there may be considerable disadvantage, not low you and me in parlicula.r, of course, but surely to all hers. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 46 I 437. Such knowledge would constitute a serious disadvantage if it encouraged egos to invent grand theories of our special importance, as a species or as individual, which could, in turn, lead us to see everything else, beside ourselves, as relatively unimportant and insignificant. Self-importance might breed arrogance and lead us to ignore opportunities to improve ourselves. Convinced of our special value, we might end up with a haughty disregard for the significance of others as well as a disrespectful attitude toward the ecosystems that sustain us. Do you think that could happen? Are humans capable of that type of blind arrogance? To be on the safe side, I think we should be careful not to encourage these particularly dysfunctional attitudes even if they do represent traditional values. Do you think J have been unnecessarily harsh in laying out some of the conceptual foundation for the description of reality that will follow in the next LVO sections? Have I been ruthless in deflating egos, bursting cherished bubbles, and pushing difficult and discomforting concepts at you from every direction? I hope you don't feel that way. To me, the logical premises and conclusions found within my big TOE are emancipating, empowering, and fun. I hope you are finding them interesting and potentially useful as well, and that you are encouraged lopmsu and self-direct. The evolution of your consciousness. I hope you are having fun stretching your mind around these ideas, whether you are finding solid agreement with your personal data or carefully formulating a debunker's rebuttal. Light-hearted fun is an important component of learning. 47. Uncertainty and manipulating. The future with intent. The nature of psi phenomena, measurement and validation taking the path of knowledge. ILE have discussed how AUM and we are related, how our nature and N purpose derives from the nature and purpose of the evolving digital consciousness system we call AUM. We have seen that we are a part of a larger consciousness organism that is dependent, as all growing and evolving complex systems are, upon all of its parts pulling together to ensure its continued growth and existence. In this chapter, we shift gears and explore the larger reality from a more human perspective. VVEU take a look at how uncertainty, constraint, unconsciousness, psi phenomena, and spiritual growth are related to our existence in PMR and in the big picture. This chapter will tie together many of the ideas we have been talking about from a more personal perspective. From the title of this chapter, it would seem that a random inelastic collision in topic space has glommed together three loosely related, but separate topics. In fact, these three topics are so thoroughly intertwined that considering them together, within a shared context, will enhance the understanding of each. To create an inlety or bounded system, one must impose constraints upon some energy form such as physical mass or non-physical consciousness. These constraints define and maintain the entity. If the constraints are removed, the entity will disintegrate, dissipate, or dematerialize. Non-conscious, non-growing, inanimate objects, from the PMR point of view, tend to stay in the state in which they are left unless there is some applied. 440 I My Big TOE Uncertainty and the Nature of Psi Phenomena. Energy, or some background energy available to remove internal or external constraints, causing motion, state changes, degeneration, decomposition, dematerialization, or sublimation. The entropy of inanimate object 5, if left alone, tends to increase. This fact is expressed by the second law of thermodynamics. See the entropy aside near the middle of chapter 24, book L. The second law of thermodynamics results from the fact that natural physical processes are irreversible and seek the lowest available energy state. It is a natural artifact of the functionality of space-time. The creation of a conscious entity follows the same rules as the creation of any entity, except conscious entities have the ability to modify themselves with free will intent. External constraints are imposed on a subset of conscious potential energy to form an individuated consciousness that is an individual sentient entity. Additional external constraints are imposed on the interactions and perceptions of that individuated consciousness, such as through the PMR space-time rule set, in order to create an environment that facilitates evolutionary progress. However, with the attributes of consciousness, a sentient entity can create its own internal constraints. The internal constraint that a sentient entity typically imposes upon itself will inevitably limit the evolutionary potential of that entity. Some self-imposed constraints may appear to serve a temporary purpose, and some are obviously more dysfunctional, unprofitable, than others, but all must eventually be removed by the entity if it is to actualize its full potential. Adding uncertainty and minimizing constraints within a given virtual reality will always generate wider evolutionary potential for the entities within that reality, because greater freedom and additional choices suppose a more diverse set of potential outcomes. When you are caught in a belief trap, have a belie, you create an additional internal consum 1 in L that further limits the capacity and function of your consciousness. Creating or maintaining unprofitable internal constrainers that limit your personal consciousness requires energy, dysfunctional organization, and increases the entropy of your consciousness. Though constraints may configure a system for some specific purpose, they generally limit the potential energy of the system. Internal constraints within a consciousness system that limit growth and profitability represent suboptimal or profit-inhibiting digital organization. Organizational energy is expended, but the results are counterproductive, are dysfunctional and unprofitable to the system, or block future profitability. Think of self-imposed internal constraints in terms of a negative DG-lal potential energy or a negative potential synergy. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 47 I 441. Adding unprofitable internal constraints, belief, fear, and ego, to your consciousness is analogous to scattering bricks and concrete blocks on a highway. The highway was built by employing profitable external constraints, all traffic confined to a convenient and efficient roadway of a specific type and location, while littering it with obstacles represents the addition of dysfunctional internal constraints that reduce the roadway's functionality and efficiency. The energy of consciousness has the potential to organize itself more effectively, to develop more complete and brighter awareness, generate and creatively utilize understanding, feeling, caring, jove, and directed mental effort in a way that is useful and helpful to itself and to other consciousness struggling to evolve. Each individuated consciousness generates its own unique path toward increasing or decreasing profitability, yet all are expressions that reflect the process and purpose of the whole. Better quality within the Law 1GER consciousness system is actualized through the synergistic self-improvements of its individuated parts. Entropy reduction is the name of the game at all levels and within all dimensions of the consciousness evolution fractal, wherever evolution is succeeding. \v wherever evolution is not succeeding, th.at portion of the consciousness evolution fractal is stagnant, deteriorating, or dying. The entropy within a consciousness system, including an individuated subsystem, represents the unavailability of consciousness energy to do work. The prima 1y work of consciousness is to more effectively organize itself, to take charge of its own evolution, and to increase its overall profitability through self-modification, growth. Higher entropy states within consciousness represent unprofitable organization, disorganization, fears, beliefs, dimness, diminished potential, self-centeredness, and an inability to understand complex interrelationships or see big pictures. Higher entropy results in consciousness systems having less power that can be applied to overcome the inertia of ignorance and ego dysfunctionality. Not decreasing the entropy of consciousness results in a squandering of potential. The fewer internal dysfunctional constraints, such as fear 1, ego, needs, or beliefs, that limit a particular consciousness, the low one its associated entropy and the more effectively it can populate the most profitable states available to it. The drive or urge to be helpful to, and care about others, love, is an innate property of low entropy consciousness. A low entropy consciousness is an effective and powerful consciousness. Consequently, a low entropy individual consciousness represents an effective individual with considerable personal power. 442 My big TOE uncertainty and the nature of psi phenomena. The self-removal of internal self-imposed constraints from sentient entities provide opportunities for reducing entropy and increasing synergy, while internal constraint removed from inanimate objects provide opportunities for increasing entropy. Constraints come in many forms. For example, if someone who has the ability to manipulate non-physical energy is asked to remove, dissipate or dematerialize a tumor, noticeable lump, from someone's PMR body, the energy required is dependent upon, among other things, the degree to which this tumor is connected to PMR reality, its force of being in PMR. This hokey-sounding force of being is actually well defined in Chapter 11, Book 3. Quantitatively, it is the expectation value of the future event on the associated probable reality surface, a discussion that we will have in detail in Chapter 7, Book 3. If the body's owner and a few others are mildly distressed about the possibility of a malignant tumor, the removal energy may be relatively low, easy to accomplish. In this situation, much uncertainty exists within PMR, but not necessarily for the one viewing and manipulating the body's non-physical energy from within NPMR, that person, the nature of the lump may be perfectly clear. If, on the other hand, 4 doctors and half TL1E residents at the local hospital have looked at the CAT scan or felt the lump and are relatively certain the tumor is malignant, the removal energy is somewhat higher. When all of the above get the biopsy report confirming a fast-growing, incurable, always deadly malignancy, the required energy increases. The more firmly the malignant tumor's existence and likely outcome, degree of causal certainty, is held and shared in the minds and expectations of credible sentient beings, the taller and denser its probability function becomes. The uncertainty of the outcome dissipates and the probable event of dying in PMR from this cancer becomes much more difficult to change by manipulating energy in PMRN. Fortunately, the intent and attitude, mental focus, of the body's owner has the greatest potential impact. Unfortunately, this attitude is often driven by its fear and the opinions and fears of others. Now, by definition, it takes a miracle, where before no miracle was required. The confident knowledge of the doctors, which is based on test results and historical precedent, mortality statistics, actually affects, decreases, the probability of actualization of other alternative possibilities such as the cancer spontaneously going into remission, or the tumor turns out to be benign. As in quantum mechanics, performing the measurement forces the result to pick a state compatible with PMR causality, compatible with the PMR space-time rule set. Typically, the most likely. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 47 I 443. State at the time of the measurement is picked unless there are several states of equal probability, then one outcome is picked randomly from among the set of outcomes, future states, that are all most likely. The individual with the tumor, along with his or her friends and loved ones, can inadvertently help drive the final outcome to an unhappy ending by causing the probability of a fatal outcome to grow, and the probability of a non-fatal outcome to shrink. Beware, you can be easily drawn into a fatal dance of expectation with those connected to you, or to your condition. The best time for intervention, whether from PMR or NPMR, is long before fatal becomes a near inevitability. The future is not a done deal. PMR is an interactive reality. We have free will and the potential ability to manipulate or at least strongly influence the probability of any particular event manifesting into the physical. There are rules and wisdom that must be applied to the use of non-physical energy. There are things that one should and should not do as well as things that one can and cannot do. For example, one needs know when help becomes interference. Helping out and the more immediate small picture can sometimes be counterproductive, in a larger perspective because difficult challenges often represent great opportunities. When one removes the challenge, one removes the opportunity as well. Most of us would be surprised at how effective a knowledgeable and experienced individual can be working from NPMR. The point is, reversing the causal laws of space-time, a miracle, requires much more energy than directly modifying the outcome of an uncertain event. Later I will formalize this concept in what J call the psi uncertainty principle. I am not speaking about what is often referred to as the power of positive thinking or the power of belief and faith to manifest physical effects. These effects are real, but are typically weak, inconsistent, and unreliable. I am talking about directly and precisely altering the probable future with the intentional power of a focused, clear, and coherent mind. Positive thinking and putting energy in low wishes or prayer can be useful and effective, but their effects are often not very potent or predictable because the energy of conscious intent supporting them is typically not well focused, coherent, or aware of the larger issues. There are exceptional people, sometimes in exceptional circumstances, who have used these typically impotent forms forcefully. Hoping for or trying to project belief or faith into a measurable result typically produces, if it produces an thing at all, a mild, diffuse, unpredictable, and unfocused effect driven by fuzzy emotions and feelings instead of precise knowledge and experience. It is the difference between feeling the gentle warmth of the 444 I my big toe I uncertainty and the nature of psi phenomena. Sun through a window, and using a large and powerful magnifying glass to enable that same sunlight to burn holes through whatever blocks its path. It is exactly the same sunlight radiating heat through a piece of glass in both cases, but differing methodologies of interacting with the sun's energy produce very different results. Similarly, without an enforced coherency, a laser is just an ordinary red light. The methodology that intentionally employs a sophisticated energy manipulation technique, optical lens, laser, or NPMR awareness, to focus ambient energy is the one that has the power to produce dramatic effects and dependable results. Such techniques, large diameter accurate error-free lenses, laser coherency, or an ability to manipulate NPMR energy, embody the accumulated knowledge and experience of many generations and typically require skill and practice to produce and apply. This discussion will, unfortunately, lead many to one of two intellectual extremes. The first and most common concludes that if a cancer whose existence is unverified, greater uncertainty, is the only cancer that can be cured by the proper focusing of consciousness, then such activity is fake or based upon self-delusion. That is not a logical conclusion. It may be a reasonable conclusion under some conditions, but not necessarily all conditions. In no case does is fake follow logically from unverified. We tend to jump to that illogical conclusion because of our dogmatic cultural and scientific beliefs. Logic does require a physically unverified problem to have a physically unverified solution. However, we will see below that the psi uncertainty principle requires that problems that are physically verified, known malignant tumor, must have either a physically verifiable physical solution or a physically unverifiable non-physical solution. The second extreme, more illogical than the first, concludes that until the cancer is verified by measurement, in PMR exclusively, the cancer does not actually exist. Clearly, fundamental existence is not logically dependent upon performing physical measurements. It is UUE that until the cancer is verified by measurement in PMR, the cancer cannot be proved to exist in PMR. That fact, though logical, carries little practical significance in either the big picture or the little picture because existence and the proof of that existence are very different things. Likewise, actually dissolving a tumor by manipulating non-physical energy and proving that a tumor has been dissolved through the manipulation of non-physical energy are two very different things. The first is not logically dependent on the second, although the second is logically dependent on the first. That nothing can be considered real or significant until it has been objectively proven is an illogical position based on the assumption that PMR constitutes all reality and that you, your consciousness, are a derivative of. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 47 I 445. Physical matter. This mystical belief requires excellence to be proven or validated by little picture causality. The existence of the big picture requires validation from the little picture. Same old story. This belief is not only illogical and irrational, but limiting as well. Objective PMR-based proof is valuable in some circumstances, exploring the space-time rule set, and totally irrelevant in others, exploring consciousness and the larger reality. Faking PMR objectivity. A universal requirement banishes logical beginnings and forces PMR to be a universal reality. When you view PMR as a universal reality, everything beyond PMR vanishes before your eyes as your vision contracts to perceive the little picture exclusively. Hard, but not necessarily only material, evidence and a careful scientific process is absolutely required. Keep in mind that knowledge constrained solely to PMR defines only a limited perception of reality and not necessarily reality itself. The fact is, your existence extends beyond IL's physical manifestation in PMR. Most people resemble flatlanders criticizing the concept of a sphere because it doesn't follow, isn't derivable or conceivable, from their two-dimensional science, philosophy, TW reality. Without an open and capable mind you are stuck, ignorant forever, in flatland. A reference to TL1 ebook F/Atland, and how to find it online, appears in Chapter 20, Book L. You may be wondering how you could learn to be sentient and operative in NPMR. It may seem nearly impossible from your perspective to achieve consistency and clarity, but it is not. Steady effort and due diligence eventually will produce clear and consistent results for anyone. The limiting constraints, which are within your power to remove, are not constraints placed on your consciousness by fate, biology, or from the outside. They are internal constraints of your own making that you have created with your belief, ego, and fear. Your natural mind does not limit or constrain your NPMR experiences. The unnatural mind that you and your culture have created is the problem. Learning how to be sentient in NPMR does not represent a new skill that must be mastered, it simply occurs spontaneously after self-imposed constraints are removed. LT is an unlearning that is required. That sounds easy, but if you have ever tried to break deeply ingrained thought patterns, hardcore habits, you know it is not easy. Nevertheless, unlearning always yields to steady serious effort. Viewing a clear picture of the larger reality will, for most of us, require stepping outside normal habituated thought patterns and cultural beliefs. Unlearning or escaping old patterns must precede learning new ones. It is not easy to overcome limiting habits of mind, but it is well worth the 446 My Big TOE Uncertainty and the Nature of Psi Phenomena. Effort. For those few who have broad and deep experience with the larger reality, My Big TOE will read as if it were a story about Dick, Jane, and Spot, familiar, simple, and obvious. For a few others, it will be as impenetrable as a wall of granite. I am strongly encouraging you to think out of the box, non-conform, send yam culture, and expand your notion of the possible beyond what is commonly held to be acceptable. As you are well aware, thinking big thoughts in small places can be socially and personally risky. This challenge is not for everyone, but if you have read this far, more than likely, it is a challenge that you can successfully meet. I expect that I have by now exceeded the credibility threshold of many readers. In techno jargon that means that I have pegged their BS meters. I can smell the smoke before I completely burn out your super sensitive, culturally calibrated BS detector. Let me digress a moment because it is important for you to understand how the quality, content, and intensity of your thoughts affect, typically limit, the options and opportunities of your being. The open-minded skeptic is free to explore anything anywhere, with demanding standards toward converting experience into knowledge, truth. The closed-minded skeptic is trapped by the limits he places on his thoughts and abilities. He is caught in the following dilemma: fearful of exceeding the safe and acceptable limits of cherished religious, personal, cultural, or scientific dogma. He believes it is fundamentally impossible to find truth in a wild and crazy subjective world which is obviously populated by plenty of fools and liars. Religious creed, his in particular, and scientific objectivity, his in particular, appear to provide safe havens free from the ubiquitous fools and liars who would gladly induce everyone else to join their delusional and manipulative ranks. long as his boundaries are rigidly defined by, can't be expanded beyond, his limiting beliefs, he is not able to learn, grow, experience or evolve his being along the path of knowledge. This path, which often wanders through the lands of the paranormal, requires a fundamental, experientially based, understanding of reality and knowledge of truth. One must be both careful and courageous. Such a limited individual usually feels he is maximizing his human potential by dedicating his energies to the optimal manipulation of intellectual objects, beings, and relationships in PMR. He has never had an objectively verifiable, proven, experience that would necessarily, scientifically, indicate a bigger picture exists, because this type of experience is emphatically defined within his belief system to be absolutely impossible, the self-referential catch-22 of the closed mind. Individuals trapped in the little picture selectively restrict, view and interpret their and other people's experiences to make sure that what is believed to be impossible does not appear to happen. Additionally, they negate the validity of anyone else's data or experience. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 47 I 447. Of a larger reality, by assuming TOE contrived, ignorant, manipulative or delusional, by definition. This fight of ascientific and logical evaluation steeped in tradition and in support of the status quo, issues to wrap the entire sleight of hand in a mantle of professional respectability. This particularly shallow circular logic, it can't be true because it can't be true, is subsequently offered by conventional scientists as proof that their beliefs are actually facts. This is an emotional ego-driven position rather than an objective one. A rational argument rarely has any effect on an irrational belief. Ironically, the closed-minded skeptics interpret internally derived knowledge as mere belief, because they do not believe that objective knowledge, truth, can come from subjective experience. The PMR-only view of reality, along with its tiny picture of the potential of your being and its associated relatively tiny subset of truth, is usually culturally based, particularly in the West, intellectually justified, and socially supported by the collective mind. The collective mind, unfortunately, always represents the lowest common denominator in concepts and understanding. It is relatively safe, easy, low risk, non-threatening, and not subjected to ridicule by your peers. It is, therefore, particularly attractive to fearful, underdeveloped, insecure, underpowered, and materially focused minds. If you feel uneasy after assessing how that string of adjectives in the previous sentence applies to you, relax. Many good people of outstanding quality exhibit some of those characteristics. The point here is to recognize the arbitrary, unnecessary, and debilitating conceptual limitations we place on our reality, on our significance, and on ourselves. If you have attained high status within your profession and among your peers, or are rich, powerful, and famous, these trappings of success say absolutely nothing about the quality of your consciousness or the evolution of your being as viewed from the bigger picture. The biggest fish have the most power, notoriety, and make the biggest splash in the PMR farm pond may be among the smallest fish in the gigantic NPMRN ocean. Conversely, some of the smallest, most humble fish in the PMR pond may be some of the biggest fish in the NPMRN ocean. By growing the quality of whatever slate of being we presently find ourselves in, we evolve the quality of our consciousness. You can start from any point, but the optimal place to start is from wherever you happen to be today. If you or anyone you know has an interest in personal growth, even if they require the comfort and safety of a relatively closed mind, there are two viable alternatives to the path of knowledge: doing good deeds, path of service, and devotion to the highest expression of spirituality they can comprehend, path of surrender. Unfortunately, both of these paths are especially difficult to follow in Western cultures where material progress and success are dominant social values. 448 My big TOE uncertainty and the nature of psi phenomena. Let's take a break before some of you burn out your analytical clutch. It keeps slipping like that because of a lack of personal high-quality data. You should immediately scrape the sticky belief residue and corrosive pseudo-knowledge off your main brain drive mechanism. That will get you by for now, but remember to get that condition, lack of high-quality data, repyrite as soon as possible. If you keep your speed down and avoid jumping over challenging new concepts in order to more quickly reach comfortable old conclusions, it should be safe for you to continue after this short aside. A brief description of the common paths leading toward self-realization, consciousness evolution, or spiritual growth will provide a helpful perspective on the entanglement of psi phenomena, spirituality, knowledge, and truth, and give all our brains a short cool-down rest from analytic activity. We can divide the approaches to spiritual evolution into 3 equal but distinct paths that suit or accommodate 3 distinctive personality types. Eventually all 3 paths converge, with each path containing the essential truths of the other 2. Each individual seeker's growth path can contain any proportion of each of the above-mentioned 3 ways, paths of knowledge, service, and surrender, of approaching spirituality in order to obtain a best fit to their individual personality. If the concept of seeking a spiritual growth path falls to the uncomfortable or negative side of your learned sensibilities, let me point out that the concept of a growth path toward improving the quality, decreasing the entropy, of your consciousness means exactly the same thing. Because the 3 paths to consciousness will appeal to diverse personality types, typically one process will dominate an individual's approach. Individuals choose the path that suits them best and afterward add in the other 2 as complements. An equal balance of all 3 might be theoretically advantageous, but it would not necessarily be better for any specific individual. The main thing is to optimize progress, spiritual growth, by matching the process to the personality. The path of knowledge is often called the warrior's path because of the courage, determination, and constant struggle required to gain spiritual knowledge and defeat the ego for control of the process of consciousness evolution. This path requires considerable intellectual capacity and is more suited to the linear thinking of the Western mind than the alternatives. It is on the path of knowledge that you learn, firsthand, about the larger reality and how to manipulate energy to put the so-called paranormal or psi phenomena to work in the service of spiritual growth, yours and others. These paranormal abilities are the natural result of a lower entropy consciousness having more energy available to do work. You can accomplish more and you have more power with a lower entropy consciousness. This additional available energy can, but does not have to, be utilized to manifest paranormal or psi effects. We can now answer the question, what do love and psi phenomena have to do with each other? Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 47 I 449. Reality, Spiritual Growth, and Digital Consciousness. The answer, the ultimate reality is cellular, digital, consciousness. Consciousness naturally evolves to lower entropy states, psi effects and love are both artifacts of low entropy consciousness. In the big picture, the paranormal is perfectly normal and available to, not thrust upon, anyone who sufficiently lowers the entropy of their consciousness. Love describes how a low entropy consciousness interacts with other entities. Both accrue to a high quality of consciousness which, for an individuated consciousness, is equivalent to a highly spiritual individual. For sentient entities, psi power is love power is quality consciousness power. All are the result of consciousness systems and subsystems evolving to lower entropy states of being. The path of service involves doing good deeds, being helpful, serving others, and must come sincerely from the heart. Not the intellect. Mother Teresa comes to mind as a well-known example. On this path, the ego is transcended through focusing on others' needs. The path of surrender requires that you give yourself up to a higher, supreme, spiritual concept or being, or to the expression of more perfect spiritual values. This is the traditional religious path that transcends the ego by dedication and devotion to higher ideals and values, and through emulation of the beloved master, teacher, guru, or God. Look near the end of Chapter 21, Book 1 for additional discussion on this topic. Let's get back to the main issue. The entanglement, interaction, of uncertainty with the measurement of psi effects leads to what I descriptively call the psi uncertainty principle, where the uncertainty surrounding an event allows the event a larger selection of probable outcomes that may be more easily altered by the application of a focused, low-noise, small ego, mind with a clear intent. Here, psi, as defined earlier in Chapter 19, Book L, refers to psychic, paranormal, or acausal phenomena. The psi uncertainty principle makes the scientific objective measurement of psi performance problematical, but only from the PMR perspective. As soon as there are outside observers to report and measure the miracles, reduce the uncertainty about reported violations of additional PMR physics, the miracles diminish, and insiders cannot be trusted to be objective and therefore cannot be believed. Let's explore how the randomness of certain natural events is related to the psi uncertainty principle. A focused and directed consciousness, physically embodied or not, may take advantage of the uncertainty or randomness in physical interactions, situations, or phenomena by subtly applying psychokinetics, PK, or telepathic suggestion to manipulate events toward a particular outcome. The results of these manipulations would simply appear within PMR to be good or bad luck, an intuitive bolt OUL of the 450 my big TOE uncertainty and the nature of psi phenomena. Blue, or a random skewing of the expected statistical distribution. Such manipulations are typically helpful and relatively common. They create no contradictions and pose no causality problems within PMR as long as there is enough uncertainty, lack of objective proof, hide the paranormal outside influence and satisfy the psi uncertainty principle. If we would learn to make better use of the guidance and breaks that we are given, growing up wouldn't be so difficult. Most parents would probably say the same thing about their teenagers. Teenagers, just like their parents, ignore as much of this outside guidance and beneficent manipulation as possible. Do you see how the same patterns of individual growth are repeated at every level? Repetitive pattern is the nature of a fractal system. The pattern of consciousness evolving toward higher levels of organization, better quality and lower entropy, is applied at many levels and scales simultaneously. What you see your children doing is a flexion of what you are doing, is what computers will be doing when our hardware and software allow it, is what the big cheese is doing, and what AUM is doing. Consciousness does not evolve in 1,000 different and independent ways, it evolves in the same way in 1,000 different forms at various levels of interdependence. I hear someone asking, are you implying the paranormal is purposely being hidden from us by some uncertainty principle? Absolutely not. It may appear that way from PMR, but in fact it is just the opposite. The paranormal is not hidden by anything other than ignorance and limitations. It is you who are hiding from the paranormal by allowing your beliefs and fears to create an impenetrable smokescreen of objective obfuscation. The psi uncertainty principle's job is to maintain the integrity of the PMR learning lab, not to hide psi phenomena from you. If you have defined the paranormal out of your reality, chat is because there is no logical place for it within your little picture. Why do the residents of PMR need the psi uncertainty principle? How does the psi uncertainty principle help lower the entropy of individuated consciousness within space-time? Breaking the rules of PMR objective causality would, at this time, interfere with what the beings enrolled there must accomplish, improving the quality of their consciousness. A rule set is specifically designed for each virtual PMR learning lab to optimize the learning potential of the typical inhabitants of that PMR. More advanced players can access a wider set of rules. You may be wondering how psi uncertainty principle constrains your personal experience and how high-quality consciousness can be. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 47 I 451. Used to your advantage in day-to-day interactions within PMR. Rarely is acausal or paranormal information obtained from NPMR and then directly applied to develop or invent physical devices because our psi uncertainty principle would generally forbid that sort of overt information transfer. LT is not likely TL1 at a novel solution like instructions describing how to build a Buck Rogers anti-gravity belt, could be effectively transmitted to an individual within PMR from a high one-dimensional source. It would be impossible for such an individual to be technically or conceptually prepared unless the transferred technology represented only a very small step beyond the receiver's current understanding. Imagine trying to describe color television or microprocessor chip technology to Alexander the Great or Alexander Graham Bell. The near impossibility of being technically prepared is only half the problem. The receiver would need a very high quality of consciousness to receive a clear technical transmission, and such people are not particularly interested in inconsequential physical gizmos and technology, no matter how useful it might be in PMR, because better gizmos are not relevant to the purpose of consciousness evolution. Additionally, there is the problem of needing all sorts of unavailable parts and materials. Building a color TV or microprocessor chip with the materials and tools available to either one Alexander would have been impossible even if they had a clear SIG. NAL and were good at following directions. You cannot cheat evolution or circumvent evolutionary process. Evolutionary process defines the rational structure of your system. Undermining it would destroy the system's integrity. Psi uncertainty is required to maintain the integrity of your causal system. It is applied at all levels of the consciousness evolution ecosystem to maintain local causality within each dimension. On the other hand, a more limited but very similar transfer process working through individual intuition continually feeds inventors and creators of all types the answers and inspiration they require to take the next step. An adequately prepared person in touch with their intuition will often receive some key point or understanding that resolves an issue upon which they are stuck, or that somehow lubricates the creative process. Again, the step must be small and the receiver must come to the intuitive process prepared to understand and implement the solution. The psi uncertainty principle makes it exceedingly unlikely that paranormal information will provide a useful giant step solution to an objective PMR problem. Think of the requirement for psi uncertainty as a constraint that limits the size of the leap that insight is allowed to take in any given circumstance within PMR, or, for that matter, within any reality dimension, either physical or non-physical. 452 My big TOE uncertainty and the nature of psi phenomena. The usual highly filtered, low bandwidth connection between NPMR and individual intuition is designed to preserve psi uncertainty. Both a prepared intellect and an evolved consciousness are necessary for you to purposefully and effectively use your intuition as a source of insight. Ask any innovative problem solver about the source of their creative solutions and you will hear about their non-logical connection to resources within NPMR expressed in a way that makes sense to them. A lower entropy consciousness improves our ability to clearly see relationships among the data we normally gather and assess from PMR. Understanding these relationships provides a bigger picture that delivers an enormous practical advantage to low-entropy individuals within PMR without violating the psi uncertainty principle. Individual intuition, insight, artistic, personal, and scientific epiphanies that result in physical creations with in PMR must be integrated with the ideas that presently reside in that individual's current PMR experience packet, temporarily stored in the physical brain. It is the quality and capacity of our consciousness that allows us low CPMR relationships in a creative new way. Because no discrete acausal or paranormal information transfer from NPMR to PMR is required for consciousness to develop and improve its 0.5 natural attributes, lower its entropy, or be creative, the psi uncertainty principle is preserved. Quality consciousness not only gives us the ability to see relationships dearly, but also to find meaning, significance, value, and direction from the data and experience that we normally gather in PMR. A lower entropy consciousness interacts with reality at a higher and more complete level of integration, and, if enrolled in the PMR learning lab, is able to apply what it learns from that interaction to future interactions. Humans, as well as other units of individuated consciousness, learn to develop their consciousness quality D1 rough the intenic 1. Ions and feedback provided by virtual PMR learning labs. Electrical engineers study systems with two kinds of feedback. Systems with positive feedback arc like big snowballs rolling down a smooth steep snowy mountainside. Systems with negative feedback are like big snowballs rolling up a smooth steep snowy mountainside. TI1E characteristics and response of the system is represented by the size of the snowball and the depth of the snow, while the effect of the feedback and its impact on the SY-STEM is analogous to the steepness of the slope. Relative to the manipulation of psi energy, intentionally reorganizing bits within TL1E larger reality, or the transferring of paranormal information, individuated units of consciousness are in a positive developmental feedback loop, bootstrapping process, 2. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 47 I 453. Expand and grow those abilities and processes chat are important to improving consciousness quality. J. In contrast, physical activity MD interactions that are not important to improving consciousness quality, though they may seem extremely important from PMR's little picture point of view, are kept in check by a negative feedback loop that uses the constraint of psi uncertainty W dampen counterproductive intentions. Pumping up the physical with information transfers from the non-physical is forbidden unless the answers are sufficiently vague, negative feedback, to ensure a sufficiently dampened system response. The uncertainty principle is required to maintain and optimize the purpose of the larger reality, to increase quality and lower entropy. The constraint of psi uncertainty keeps PMR focused and functioning toward its goal, which is not to generate physical improvements within PMR, but to help individuated consciousness pull itself up by its bootstraps. The generation of a more comfortable, physically productive, including better science, PMR is clearly the main issue within the local little picture, and the 1A4 appears to be very important from the PMR view. Altal 1U physical progress plays a part in the bigger picture by locally impacting consciousness evolution, it is only a minor player on the periphery of the greater consciousness ecosystem. Consciousness does not exist to promote physical evolution within PMR, physical evolution within PMR exists to promote consciousness. The constraint of psi uncertainty allows the energy of organization to be pumped into, equivalent to sucking entropy out of, what is important, spiritual progress through exercising the ability to see relationships clearly and to find meaning, significance, value, and direction from PMR experience, while avoiding pumping energy into what is not important, power, control, domination, and physical progress. Psi uncertainty is simply a rule, a natural constraint that has evolved to improve the profitability of the consciousness cycle. Think of the psi uncertainty constraint as a negative feedback mechanism that is required to optimize the productivity of PMR virtual reality trainers. The apparent subterfuge of hiding psi phenomena on day one, a cloak of uncertainty, is an illusion created by the rudimentary nature of human consciousness. No one would leave knives, guns, axes, hammers, saws, expensive cell phones, or laptop computers lying about on the playground at a daycare facility. The kids might love it and have great fun, but the adults know that children must grow up first before they can productively, and non-self-destructively, use such tools. LT is not required that the tools be hidden from the children, but the children must be unaware of how to. 454 I My Big TOE Uncertainty and the Nature of Psi Phenomena. Access these tools until they are capable of using them productively. As the kids grow up, various tools naturally become available to them. Believe it or not, most consciousness kids, after they reach adulthood, have little overt use for, or interest in, the tools of psi. Wielding power within the virtual world of the learning lab becomes irrelevant unless it is the power of setting a good example and offering helpful guidance. The disappearance of psi effects when objective science shines its spotlight on the paranormal scene does not necessarily indicate fraud. The requirement to work only within a narrowly defined subset of physical reality and to exhibit perfect repeatability for everyone to see is a good methodology for the development of some science because, within a limited realm, those requirements do separate a limited truth from an unlimited fiction. However, it is a totally inappropriate measure of significance when applied to some aspects of the science of consciousness, the science of being, the science of mind, or the science of NPJ_1FR. Instead of viewing the requirement for uncertainty as a cover-up for fraud or delusion, consider it be a requirement of the space-time rule set to maintain the integrity of the physical reality we need to experience in order to stimulate growth. Mixing physical apples with non-physical oranges only muddies the waters of our experience and decreases the effectiveness of space-time as a learning lab. Having our experience directly related to our responsibility for that experience and keeping our interactions with others straightforward and an integral part of an obvious feedback loop are the major design goals of our PMR space-time reality. A widespread intentional use of psi would seriously undermine those goals. If you are not sure where I am coming from with these statements, reread the beginning of the AUM, Scientist at Work aside located in Chapter 9 and at least the last half of the Free WIU aside in Chapter 11, both are in this book. You will see that PMR was specifically designed to constrain psi effects in order to produce a better learning environment. Psi effects within PMR are relegated T0 the subjective fringe where they can be easily obscured by uncertainty. This arrangement is a requirement of our reality as long as the average level of consciousness quality is so low. Individuals may experience and use the paranormal as they lower the entropy of their consciousness to gain that ability, but it cannot become generally accessible through objective science without wrecking the primary value and usefulness of PMR as a training simulator for low-quality consciousness. Don't worry, the system is designed to prevent that from happening and the psi uncertainty principle is only part of that prevention strategy. If you have no access to paranormal power and think that psi. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 47 I-455. Effects are a bunch of bullpucky, well, that is probably as it should be. Such a view does not constitute a failure, an error, or a problem, it simply represents a particular state of developmental understanding, like being 12 years old. There is nothing wrong with being 12 years old. In fact, it is an absolutely necessary and desirable state to be in if you ever expect to be a teenager. You cannot be a teen until you have been 12, and you cannot be an adult until you have been a teenager. No one jumps ahead, everyone must start from wherever they happen to be. Truly, anywhere you are is a terrific place to start, there are no bad seats in the house. Everyone must progress under their own power and at their own rate. That is simply how the game must be played, there is no other choice and no other game. If from time to time it appears to you that my big toe has cleverly or unfairly backed you in a logical corner, consider the principle that all systems of law and justice are based upon, the only thing that can logically corner you consistently is the truth. The truth can sometimes be unpleasant, particularly if it leads us to an unsettling conclusion. Feels good 01 feels right is not a reliable way of discerning truth. To be accurate and trustworthy, your intuition needs to be free of fear, wants, needs, desires, expectations, and ego. Psi effects and paranormal powers are sometimes dangled as a carrot in front of those newly on the path of knowledge to provide incentive, but successful travelers of that path soon realize that paranormal abilities can also be a growth-limiting trap if their ego becomes enamored of them. Using or requiring inappropriate methodology in any area of endeavor typically leads to dead ends, no progress, and false conclusions. Some of the knowledge, facts, laws, rules, structure, and science, obeying NPMR causality, that define paranormal activity cannot be seen, experienced, or understood until the observer grows to be capable of it, and will consequently never exhibit perfect repeatability for everyone to see. Quality of consciousness and the directed applications of consciousness energy are personal in nature because consciousness is personal. Because psi effects are not of PMR, one cannot force them to abide by PMR causality, nor can one explain them with PMR causality. The awareness and personal growth that enables an individual to exhibit controlled paranormal applications of consciousness must be developed from that individual's subjective experience. Researchers studying psi effects cannot produce them, reproduce them, nor control them from the outside, nor can they force psi effects upon themselves or authors from the inside. On the other hand, they can easily retard it and make. 456 I my big TOE uncertainty and the nature of psi phenomena. It more difficult and problematical for their subjects to demonstrate psi effect. For a physically focused mainstream science, this jack of physical control makes the serious study of psi almost impossible. The additional scientific requirement for tight physical control over a completely non-physical entity such as consciousness, including its attributes and artifacts, in order to prove its physical existence, the only type of existence there is, of course, produces an amusing example of circular belief trap non-logic. The absurdity of this reasoning would be funnier if it weren't the position most scholars and scientists support quite seriously. Or maybe that is why it is so funny. While we are on the subject of cultural insanity and funny scientists, let's practice a little remote viewing. I see three typical looking university scientists dressed in white lab coats, standing in a small room with a metal table. On the table is a child's microscope. Listen, and you can clearly hear Curly talking to Larry. I've got the answer. I've got it. I figured it out. Listen, nobody can prove the non-physical is physical, so it must not exist. Vous imbecile, says Larry with obvious contempt as his two outstretched fingers jab menacingly at Curly's eyes. Of course the non-physical isn't physical. It's not supposed to be. Yuck 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 yuck, answers Curly as he cleverly blocks the eye jab with the side of his hand. If the non-physical isn't physical, then how am I going to examine it with this microscope? Good point, says Mo thoughtfully. What we need is a non-physical microscope. Curly and Larry glance at each other quizzically and begin to look in their pockets and under the table. Mo watches them search in vain for the non-physical microscope for a few moments before he says, "You two numbskulls couldn't find a non-physical microscope if you tripped over it." Curly and Larry immediately begin using their hands to search the empty floor around their feet for the invisible microscope. Mo moves quickly. He grabs Curly and Larry by the ears and proceeds to bang their heads together. All three begin to quarrel. "I just had a non-physical myself and the doctor said that both of you were very sick," interjects Mo, trying to recapture the attention of the other two. Larry and Curly suddenly stop squabbling and look at Mo with seriously worried expressions. "How bad is it?" they ask in unison. The ensuing pregnant pause suddenly aborts. "I had a physic too," Larry interjects to break the worried silence, "but everything came out all right." Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 47 I 457. "So, that's what happened to your brains," Mo quips as if suddenly receiving great insight. "Now, you two get back to work. We aren't going to leave this lab until we can prove that we can read each other's minds." "But, I can't read at all," protests Curly. "No problem, you are a mad scientist, not an angry English teacher," says Mo matter-of-factly. Curly and Larry pause for a reflective moment as they absorb the apparently profound and obvious truth of Mo's statement. Soon everyone is nodding in agreement. Larry suddenly leaps on the table, assumes a Swami position and scrunches up his face in a display of great concentration while Curly and Mo look on. In a few seconds Larry jumps up, stands in the middle of the table and says dejectedly, "I am trying and trying, but all I get is a blank, actually." He continues after a short reflective pause. "I get 2 blanks. Great one," says Mo, "that's all the proof we need, let's get out of here. I want to do RT. I want to do it too. It's my turn. My turn. My turn. My tur. Whap." A strong slap from Mo stops Curly in mid-sentence. "Go ahead and give it a try, you nincompoop," says Mo indulgently. Curly scrunches up his face, turns his head to one side and begins to squeal as he quickly pumps his feet. Whap! 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 Mo gives Curly a quick triad of hard forehand backhand slaps. "All right Swami, what did you get?" asks Mo with obvious skepticism. Curly grins and puffs up his chest with pride. "I got lots of blanks. Lots and lots of blanks." Curly turns and looks at Larry. "I got more nothing than you did," taunts Curly contemptuously. "Oh yeah," says Larry, as he grabs Curly's nose and begins to twist it. Whap! Whap! Mo reaches out and delivers a hard ricocheting double slap to the two squabbling scientists. "Cut that out," he demands. "We are only supposed to read each other's minds, not tune into the entire faculty. If we do too good of a job, nobody will believe us. Too much success will get us fired." They look at each other with somber expressions as each ponders the steep and obvious downside to unbridled professional success in their chosen field. "That much truth is dangerous," one Mo states emphatically. "Yeah," agrees Larry as they exit the room. "If the dean finds out he is just as smart as we are, he may want our jobs for himself." 458 My big TOE uncertainty and the nature of psi phenomena. Because of its subjective and personal nature, it is difficult for researchers to encourage, define, or systematically and objectively study paranormal phenomena at a deep level. The most they can hope to do is observe and document its existence, a relatively simple thing that has been done thousands of times by hundreds of fully credentialed scientific researchers. 1. Good objective scientific protocol requires the experimenters to remove all possible uncertainty, thus interfering with, and limiting, the psi effect being studied. Where some uncertainty is allowed, better results, from an insider's viewpoint, are produced. From an outsider's point of view, only less credible results are produced. There are always many more outsiders than insiders. Here, insiders are the experimenters and their subjects, everyone else is an outsider. Remote viewers, for example, cannot produce perfect high-resolution photographs for their experimenters. There is always some uncertainty, and usually, over an in-depth set of experiments, at least some inconsistency. Additional uncertainty grows quickly in the minds of individuals who are not personally in total control of the experimental protocols. It grows more quickly in the minds of those who are not physically witnessing the paranormal event. They read about it, hear about it, or see it on TV. How much uncertainty is necessary? Only enough to ensure that the vast majority of PMR citizens will not have their cherished delusions forcibly perturbed to a significant degree. If a paranormal event, precognitive dream or vision, for example, is without uncertainty, the number of people who can objectively verify this perfect demonstration of psi will always be small enough to produce no major or lasting impact on the larger society. Those individuals who are not yet ready to perceive and understand the larger truth represented by paranormal events will not be forced to experience what they cannot productively deal with. In the bigger picture, there must always be enough certainty to ensure that the perceived causal integrity of PMR, the delusion that the only reality that can possibly exist must be objective and physical, can adequately be maintained by all who are not yet developmentally ready to move beyond that most basic worldview. From the opposite direction and within a smaller picture, the natural uncertainty surrounding a given event, or sequence of events, enables and simplifies the application of focused consciousness to paranormally influence that event without violating the psi uncertainty principle. On the other hand, objective physical experience is designed to be shared and held in common. Our physical experience forms an interactive virtual reality exhibiting a uniform common causality defined by the Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 47 I 459. Space-time rule set. PMR physics is simply a subset of the space-time rule set. This idea will be developed thoroughly in Section 4. Everybody can experience the same measurable effects in PMR, however, the necessary, by the psi uncertainty principle, uncertainty that must reside at the root cause of psi effects, from a scientific PMR objective perspective, is not appreciated by the PMR scientist whose methodology requires him to eliminate uncertainty. The inability to eliminate uncertainty will frustrate the scientist's desire to understand the deeper causal mechanics of psi phenomena. PMR scientists are culturally driven to interpret what they experience in a way that is in consonance with their belief that PMR causality must contain all possible phenomena. At best, if they are patient and careful, they can demonstrate that psi phenomena merely exist, but the causal mechanics and certain repeatability of it will elude them. Their attempt to describe a phenomenon belonging to a more general and less constrained causality in terms of a less general and more constrained causal is futile. The big picture and big reality cannot be fully contained within the little picture, quite the contrary, the little picture and little reality must be a subset of the larger reality. This is not rocket science. The little limited one must be a subset of the big unlimited one, it cannot be the other one way around. Requiring the big picture reality to be described exclusively in terms of a local little picture reality is an incredibly dumb idea. Moe, Larry, and Curly understood that much. However, it is an amusing fact that many of the world's scientists are totally stumped by this trivial concept. If they cannot physically define and control consciousness and psi effects, TL1N neither can be verified to exist as an independent entity or real phenomenon. Consciousness is seen as a hallucination of physical biochemical processes while psi effects are seen as a hallucination of psychological processes. By believing that what is real is delusional, and that what is delusional is real, scientists have boxed themselves into a small corner of reality that does not contain the answers they are looking for. Worse yet, their standard definition of an unscientific fool is anyone who does not share their mystical belief in the sacred one physical reality. Some things never change. Hey, look on the bright side, at least physicians are no longer bleeding us with leeches. PMR science will always fail to explain non-physical phenomena as physical phenomena. Psi phenomena, from the PMR-only viewpoint, will never be sufficiently well behaved nor deeply understood, thus generating much uncertainty in the minds of the masses. The mystery of how or why psi works, or even the existence of psi effects for that matter, appears. 460 My big TOE uncertainty and the nature of psi phenomena. To remain unsolved and unsolvable regardless of how many times it is thoroughly solved and demonstrated by knowledgeable individuals. If you are not one of those individuals, or involved with one, or do not know one well enough to fully trust their intelligence and integrity, you probably do not get it at the personal level of big truth. Without personal study and careful evaluated first-hand experience, those who are unable to maintain open-minded skepticism are forced by their ego needs to either believe in the actuality of paranormal events or to disbelieve in the actuality of paranormal events, both of which are illogical positions that produce a plethora of worthless unscientific blather. The realness of psi effects must be personally experienced to be accepted or understood. Thus, sharing a piece of big picture knowledge or big truth, gained through the first-hand experience of psi effects by psi researchers or anyone else, by publishing research papers, books, or using the mass media is totally useless and ineffective. The results of psi research that confirm the existence of psi effects will never be widely accepted or believed, irrespective of how carefully and professionally the experiment was conducted, because believing such results directly conflicts with other beliefs more deeply held. On the other hand, when scientifically evaluated psi effects are part of your personal experience, especially where you are the actor, not the observer, then a larger reality is no longer a matter of belief and you know the truth even if you do not understand the mechanism behind the truth. Those who are ready to progress to the next level of being will somehow discover the truth, while those who are not ready will remain clueless until some growth experience opens TL1EIR mind to the possibilities. One cannot develop a deep personal understanding from somebody else's research or from somebody else's experience. This particular one learning process is not primarily intellectual, like learning calculus, it is more experiential, like a 1-year-old child learning to walk. Much of the uncertainty clouding psi effects is the result of belief traps retarding the evolution of consciousness within OS. As long as conscious awareness and quality remain dim and low respectively, psi effects will remain shrouded in uncertainty, mysterious, and without credibility. As the quality of consciousness grows and awareness brightens across our culture, the purposeful application of psi effects will step out of the shadows and take their rightful place alongside contemplation, complex verbal and symbolic communications, and tool-making as innate human capabilities. If a PMR scientist is looking at the result of someone else's positive measured experimental psi results, and has not done the work himself, he http://www.mybigtoe.com Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 47 I 461. Can imagine all sorts of uncertainties into the experiment and easily dismiss the results as sloppy science. Thus it is relatively easy for him to maintain the belief that his little picture, PMR only, remains intact, the no growth, no stress, no thought option. He is not burdened by the facts, nor does he have to be, because the impossibility of the stated results is a given while TL1E potential uncertainty surrounding the results looms large in his own assumption-driven scientific mind. A large uncertainty matched to an untenable result immediately leads to a strong conviction in favor of sustaining the little picture belief and ridiculing the apparent sloppy pseudoscience and ineptitude that produced the positive measured psi result in the first place. Although one scientist has adequately and scientifically proved, within reasonable certainty, the existence of some psi effect, there will be no impact on the scientific community. The existence of a broader reality will only become apparent to the few directly associated with the experiment. Merely proving, beyond the shadow of a doubt, the existence of some singular, difficult to repeat, uncertain, and mysterious psi phenomena out on the fringe of respectability is not enough to impact TL1E opinion of anyone in the rational center. Even if a psi researcher started his career from the center of accepted science, he would soon be relegated to the fringe, with perhaps no way to get back into the respectable center. Who needs those kinds of career queuing associations? Is it any wonder that scientists shun psi research like the plague? Do you see why those who have the courage and gumption to undertake psi research are not taken very seriously by anyone outside their own fraternity unless they pretend to know much less than they actually know? All problems of science and knowledge, philosophy, ontology, epistemology, cosmology, and physics, do not necessarily have technical or hard solutions. Some can be comprehended only by an experienced mind with a larger perspective. That is another fact of existence that you simply have to live with. Cheer up, particularly you hard science types, the situation is not as hopeless as it appears. Soft solutions, though inaccessible to a random simultaneous hard science group proof, can be real, scientific, productive, repeatable solutions with objective and measurable results. Yes, they can, you just don't know how yet. You do not need to do an about-face relative to what your mother told you about life and what you learned in school. Simply open up the blinders a little low, allow in a larger set of possibilities, and continue in more or less the same direction. My big toe and I want to expand your world, NOL blow it up, we are showing you a bigger picture that contains your familiar. 462 My big toe uncertainty and the nature of psi phenomena. Little picture as a subset. Relax, take a deep breath, you are not sinking into quicksand. That sucking sound coming from around your ankles is your fear trying to maintain its grip and hold you back. JT takes courage to step out of the box by yourself, dear read - it takes courage. A device or technology solution, such devices do exist, that threw someone's sentient consciousness into NPMR would simply leave that person a temporary stranger in a strange land. Their ego or mind or rational cell immediately upon return would most likely deny the reality and valid ITY of the experience. Without an open mind, and concomitant spiritual growth, elimination of fear, ego, and material attachments, as well as the mastery of mental energy, the technical solution is totally useless. Likewise, demonstrations of genuine psi phenomena to the average person, be they scientists or not, would be of little value beyond the theatrical and gee whiz effect, unless this average person won via the advantaged subject of the demonstration, it dissolved his tumor, solved his problem. He might change his beliefs if he were a witness or were personally involved, if he were teleported to China and left to come home on his own, for example. But so what? His beliefs are not important. It is his usable knowledge, his state, quality, of being, his spiritual evolution that is important, and none of these important things would be affected. The larger world will not believe him, that he had been teleported to China, and he will be considered an unreliable insider with an overactive, delusional, imagination unless he denies his experience. Absolutely nothing important or productive would be accomplished by affording this person such an experience. If loss of credibility, denial, confusion, paranoia, or assumed mental dysfunction were the Olcorn, he may have been done significant harm. Wisdom says, do not demonstrate side effects, they can achieve no significant result within the big pick-me, may actually do some harm, and have only entertainment value. On the other hand, if one wishes to be an entertainer, psi is a cool tool. Ego diminishes its power. The function of the psi uncertainty principle is not to deny the existence of psi. The reality of psi effects is absolutely certain to anyone who cares enough to discover them for himself. Those who do not know that psi effects are real are merely ignorant, or in denial, of information which is widely available and of personal experience which is relatively easy to obtain. SEC Chapter 21, Book 1 for several references. Some serious effort and a little research can solve that problem. As long as belief-blinded individuals and a belief-blinded culture demand that non-physical phenomenon be described in terms of physical causality, psi effects will. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 47 I 463. Remain cloaked in uncertainty, difficult co-study, without credibility, and relegated to the fringe of human activity. The psi uncertainty principle, a natural artifact of the interface between the non-physical and physical, primarily masks the causal mechanics and denies the efficacy and perfect repeatability of psi effects. While psi effects break, escape, frustrate, and void the PMR sacred causal chain, the psi uncertainty principle clouds that breakage enough to allow the center of thought within the PMR learning lab to maintain the illusion of the exclusiveness of little picture causality, an illusion that is necessary to optimize individual growth potential within PMR. Providing an individual with access to too much interactive power and capability before he is able to handle it wisely is always counterproductive, not dangerous. Power of mind is gained naturally and usefully as the entropy of an individual consciousness is reduced. If you need a reality check concerning the overall quality of consciousness among humans, watch the evening news or read a newspaper. There will be absolutely no doubt about the general level of unconditional love, awareness, mental entropy, consciousness quality, fear, ego, wants, desires, expectations, and needs that are loose in the land. From month to month and year to year, the news stories, from a bigger picture view, are all basically the same. Only the names of the victims and perpetrators are changed from day to protect the innocent from noticing the utter repetitive consistency that clearly points an accusing finger at the quality of the individuals who make up our culture. Whether we are in the news or not, we are all fine examples of, and proud participants in, our culture, a good case, if there ever was one, for finding the innocent guilty by association. Living in your culture and not being of it is exceptionally difficult. We are it is us, all are integrally connected. Like it or not, we are undeniably part of the problem. Fortunately, we also have the potential to be part of the solution. The good news is that by developing the quality of our consciousness, we can become a much smaller part of the problem and a much larger part of the solution. Given the elementary level at which the PMR Learning Lab is designed to function, the psi uncertainty principle is, by itself, enough to ensure that the PLVLR Learning Lab experience is uniformly direct, straightforward, simplistic, safe, and user-friendly for beginners in the consciousness evolution process. In general, though there are some exceptions, Serious paranormal ability must be gained through a significant decrease in the entropy of your consciousness. 464 My big TOE uncertainty and the nature of psi phenomena. To move beyond superficial paranormal energy manipulations, you must actively and purposely improve the quality of your consciousness. It is not a matter of technique, magical incantation, or allying yourself with powerful entities. Understanding, wisdom, and paranormal ability must be earned through your personal spiritual growth. For the most part, consciousness evolution takes place within a self-balancing, self-policing system. Preschoolers are never given power tools or guns to work and play with. Access is normally available only to those who have earned it and can profitably use it. In Section 5, we will see how the psi uncertainty principle interacts with future possible and probable real ity surfaces to enable you to affect the probability that a given future possibility will or will not actualize into our physical reality. The source and scientific nature of the law of psi uncertainty is no different from the source and scientific nature of the law of gravitation. Both are simply the natural results of the space-time rule set. Both are reflections of the constraints placed upon a consciousness in order to define a virtual reality learning lab, PMR, for the purpose of evolving that consciousness. Psi effector.s and the psi uncertainty principle are no more mystical or arbitrary than gravitation. Their application, mechanics, and interactions are as understandable, regular, and predictable as the orbits of the planets about the Sun. The ability to affect and control a broad spectrum of paranormal events is available to everyone who is willing to grow the quality of their consciousness sufficiently. However, psi ability should never be your end goal. If it is, your capability to manipulate the physical through the non-physical will be severely self-limited and perhaps even self-destructive. Psi power should be seen as nothing more than a collateral benefit of an effective path well traveled. It becomes naturally available as your big picture on day one standing deepens. As your capability increases, your immersion in wielding it decreases because you discover that you have everything you need without it. Additionally, you learn that the desire to acquire and use paranormal power often brings out the worst in those who would like to be powerful but have not earned it. It sensationalizes and trivializes the pursuit of quality in consciousness. It can be a great educational tool, a valuable device for helping others in special circumstances, as well as an ego tickler that quickly becomes an enormous distract.er of spiritual value and focus. Forget about using someone else's paranormal power to obtain some information or effect that you want. It won't work. That shortcut will turn out to be a dead end. You have everything you need inside of you. 48. A closer look at psi phenomena. NPMR, and you. There is no now you see it, and now you don't hocus pocus here. It only appears that way from the limited vision of a PMR only perspective. At a higher level of awareness, psi and psi uncertainty are straight forward scientific concepts subservient to a higher level of causality. We no longer believe that the sun and moon are pulled through the heavens by angels, a one-time very serious and popular theory strongly supported by the best and brightest of the Western scientific, philosophical, and theological establishment. 5. Similarly, we must not jump to the conclusion that the psi uncertainty principle is enforced by non-physical entities pulling strings from the NPMR background. Such simplistic, anthropomorphically driven concepts serve only to compound the original ignorance. It seems that whenever we humans are confronted by our ignorance in a grand manner that cannot be denied, we tend to extrapolate a super-stretched version of our old paradigms into an obvious solution that is supportive of the status quo. For a less obvious, but still troubling, ignorance, we often turn to spooky science or faith-based solutions or simply deny that the data, which demonstrate our ignorance, are real. Such circular belief-based logic creates its own intellectual whirlpool. Today, we are greatly amused by the idea of angels moving the heavenly bodies around. I mean, really, how could those people be so stupid? Actually, they were not stupid at all, they had about the same mental capacity that we have. They merely covered over their ibelarence with theories that were in consonance with their personal, scientific, religious, and cultural belief exactly as we do. Before feeling too smug about the silliness of Planet T0 Ting Angels, you should know that modern science and philosophy. 466 I My Big Toe I A Closer Look at Psi Phenomena, NPMR, and you use the exact same devices, with the exact same zeal, to deal with codes. Challenges to the core belief systems of our culture. Many years from now our present belief-limited science, philosophy, and theology will provide future generations with good cause to shake their heads and snicker with astonished amusement. I mean, really, how could those people be so stupid? Inevitably, our present notions of science and significance are one day going to look incredibly silly, perhaps within this century. It is one of our greatest conceits to believe that we could not possibly be that ignorant and that out of touch with reality. We are, after all, exceptionally smart and advanced, you know. Ignorance? No way. Not us. Our Western science has clearly demonstrated brilliancy and unparalleled achievement during the previous century. We finally understand how the natural world works. You must be referring to those belief-based touchy-feely folks in the third world. They remain largely ignorant, but eventually we will either need to bring them up to our level of understanding or take care of them. Subduing, educating, maintaining, or eliminating entire cultures of perpetual children may seem to be a thankless task, but it is our evolutionary responsibility, our inevitable burden to bear. I believe that self-imposed belief-based limitations do not exist, much less that they will eventually make us look unbelievably stupid to future generations. Impossible. Utterly impossible. As a species, we have become incredibly smart and scientifically advanced, everyone knows that. You must be stupid if you don't know that. I am sure that you are fully aware that we of Western culture now know or almost know everything that is significant. There are only a few fundamental details still missing, and our brilliant scientists are working on those, even as slackers like yourself waste their time reading books such as this one. It won't be long, a few generations at most, and we will have all the important information under our control. Geez, won't life be great then, you know, after science has eliminated all our problems? Wow! I can hardly wait. We are so close, yet, today, as I listen to the nightly news, scientific progress somehow seems almost irrelevant. And so far away. The general attitudes and beliefs expressed above are both current and ancient. People have felt like this since history has been recorded. And they will, most likely, continue to feel this way for a very long time to come. Does one or more of the preceding 3 paragraphs roughly represent your core beliefs? Dig deep and be honest. Have you ever noticed how insecurity, ignorance, arrogance, and ego often team up to play a particularly ugly joke? And that the joke always turns out to be at your expense. Most of us can think of at least a dozen or more instances, personal and historical, where we humans have creeled acceptable, at the time. http://www.my8igto.com Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 48 I 467. Explanations by overstretching old paradigms until gaping holes appear that must be ignored. We have ascribed mysterious effect to angels, devils, other spooks, spooky science, and employed many other non-specific metaphors for action at a distance and invisible meddlers. The easiest and most effective explanation of all is to simply deny that conflicting data exist. These are a few of the standard devices that we humans have used to deal with our ignorance and reduce our fear of the unknown. We use them no less today in our private and public lives. They make us feel more in control and provide us with the means of controlling others. Concocting comfortable solutions that maintain the integrity of our belief systems is always more acceptable to most of us than admitting ignorance and then open-mindedly and skeptically living with that ignorance until either new paradigms or new data show up. Living gracefully with the unknown is a simple and natural process in the absence of fear. However, given a widespread fear of the unknown and of new paradigms, it is no wonder that many have found, and continue to find, it easy and convenient to manipulate these deep-seated bone-level fears, more subconscious than conscious in Freudian terminology, in order to control the energy, actions, and resources of others. Our fear and ego provide ready handles that others can use to position us to their own liking. There are many devices you can use to deny your experience. The most obvious is to simply ignore it, to claim, believe, that you were tricked, blame others, conspiracies are always in fashion, or that you are suffering from temporary insanity or some other mental dysfunction. If religious, you may blame your experience on witchcraft or the devil, or perhaps if there is a little paranoia lurking in your makeup, you may explain your experience as the result of some diabolically clever hypnotic manipulation, or believe that drugs must have been surreptitiously dropped into your morning coffee. When it comes to justifying what you want, or need, to believe, pro or con, your creativity and induced myopia can rise to meet any challenge. That is the nature of the ego. It is also the origins of most, if not all, belief. There is no point in demonstrating psi effects, the GWAS effect exhibited by those in direct participation, who do not invent a way to discount or deny the experience, is useless. The same is more or less true of natural psi experiences such as the precognitive dreams or telepathic communications that hundreds of millions of people have experienced. Generally these experiences lead nowhere and are 1101. Particularly impertall in PMR. However, they often serve as a catalyst to pry open a mind. 468 My Big TOE A closer look at psi phenomena, and PMR, and you. Far enough for it to glimpse a larger reality or light a fire of inquisitiveness and can be immensely valuable to an individual ready to take the next step. An individual not ready to take the next step does not usually have these experiences. Where is the value in causing people to have experiences that they are not ready to profit from? Doing so generally causes more stress and confusion than enlightenment and in the end, usually reduces the credibility of big truth rather than enhancing it. Real evolutionary progress, real improvement in your quality of consciousness, must come from the inside out. Following our discussion about the relationship between psi phenomena and uncertainty, it would seem far easier to teleport someone to Spina and back again, rather than leave them there, because of TLLE larger uncertainty involved in proving the teleportathlon. It would be easier yet if they returned with nothing but their memory of the trip, their experience. Even if they returned with a handful of souvenirs for evidence, others would think it very easy for them to have bought the souvenirs at the local import shop or rigged the evidence by some other means. They would be generally seen as liars or delusional, that much would be obvious. The evidence would only be valid evidence to them, and perhaps a few others who trust them totally and implicitly. They would have a choice. 1L1EY could be a delusional nut in the eyes of almost everyone, though secure in theft or knowledge of the youth, or believe themselves to be a delusional nut by denying that their experience was actually real experience, plead insanity. The path of knowledge is not for the easily influenced and impressionable, the intellectually timid, the fearful, or the insecure. People with these U8s will tend to remain uncertain and confused and are easy prey for New Age charlatans, as well as the well-intentioned but unknowingly ignorant. A warrior's wrong mind, focused intent, and fearless attitude combined with a scientist's patient probing, high analytical standards, and fundamental inquisitiveness is required for optimal results. How is your progress and sanity T0 be judged if you follow the warrior's path of knowledge? Pragmatically and objectively, by looking at the results. Check to see if your knowledge and psi experiences, telepo-wanting, healing, traveling, remote viewing, or communicating telepathically with either physical or non-physical beings, are meaningful and significant, in the big picture, to yourself and to others. Determine if your understanding of the big picture produces consistent measurable results in terms of the qual-il, of your consciousness and the depth of your perception of the larger reality, including the physical. your spiritual growth, and your ability to. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 48 I 469. Help others grow spiritually, should be obvious to, and measurable by, you and others. If not, what you are experiencing is delusional. You will unquestionably and unambiguously know if you are truly knowledgeable, kind, humble, compassionate, helpful, balanced, and focused on what you can contribute to others. If you are wise, understanding, considerate, insightful, thoughtful, and loving, you and everybody else will know that you are not insane. A highly evolved individual sticks out from the crowd like an elephant in a pea patch. These individuals are beloved and held in highest esteem by all who meet them. They have a gentle and highly effective power which is fearless. Others who are not wise will know only if another individual appears to be wise, knowledgeable, kind, balanced, helpful, and not insane. You will know that you are not delusional if your capacity to love, to give, to exhibit humility and compassion in daily interactions is significantly increasing as your ego, fear, and material attachments are significantly decreasing. The artifacts of spiritual growth are not esoteric or subtle. If, on the other hand, your spiritual state is stagnating or non-existent, of low quality, ego-driven, and you interact with people by manipulating or impressing them for material or ego ends, you are failing in your efforts to improve your quality even if you have convinced others of your success or have gained some limited control of psi effects. The effects of reducing entropy in your consciousness will eventually become as obvious as being hit by a truck. You will have no difficulty telling the difference, growth 01 delusions of growth, about yourself if, a big if, you actually want to know the truth. Evaluating others can be more difficult than evaluating yourself, but the truth eventually yields to the same analysis. It is simply more difficult, sometimes, to gather the necessary data about someone else because of your limited understanding of their motivations. 1. If you have never experienced significant progress in lowering the entropy of your consciousness, you may have no idea what I mean or that what I am saying makes sense. I am trying to communicate the results of my experience clearly, but I know it is extremely difficult for anyone to understand in a deep, profound, or personal way without similar experience of his or her own. If a spiritual teacher's interactions with others are more accurately described as marketing than actually helping people significantly change their life by enhancing their opportunities for spiritual growth, then the description delusional nut with delusional or naive insiders. 470 I My Big Toe A closer look at psi phenomena, NPMR, and you. May be an accurate description of that teacher and his or her followers regardless of how real their paranormal experiences are. How do you evaluate others? When looking in from the outside, one without wisdom can typically not tell the difference between the wise and those who merely marketing themselves cleverly. You need to get involved and you need to participate. How do you separate the true from the false? You must personally experience the larger reality. You must build your knowledge of your dynamic, changing and growing, spiritual being and trust your ability to figure out what is valuable to you and profitable to you. You must grow your own wisdom. Only then can you judge what holds great value, truth, and knowledge for you, progresses you toward your spiritual goals, and what is a waste of your time, or worse, a step backwards. Thus, the proof of the pudding is in the tasrajane. Personal truth flows only from personal experience. All big truth and wisdom is personal truth. Those who judge the metaphorical pudding from the outside, without tasting, without personal experience, typically emotionally driven by fear, ignorance, and discomfort, at worst vitriohc scoffers and virulent dose-minded skeptics, are the most obviously delusional of all, like the emperor in his very respectable, socially acceptable new clothes. The difference being, in this particular situation, that the emperor and his most loyal subjects all use the same highly recommended tailor. There is a requirement for uncertainty to surround non-physical to physical manifestations. Because of the psi uncertainty principle, you are required to gain real knowledge of NPMR through only your personal experience and growth. Thusly, psi uncertainty principle is a fundamental requirement of all virtual PMR space-time learning labs. The constraint of psi uncertainty is not a punitive restriction imposed upon you because you flunked the last quality test, but rather a designed-in feature of your local reality that provides you with an optimal opportunity to lower your entropy. Do not struggle against psi uncertainty, try to get around it, or wish it were otherwise. You need it to accomplish your mission efficiently. If you did not, it would melt away. Big truth is not something that someone else can make you understand, even if they show you paranormal events all day long. You can learn facts about it from others and choose to believe it or not. However, to have real knowledge, to use that knowledge as a catalyst for the evolution of your being, to improve equality and decrease the entropy of your consciousness, requires you to get involved and gain your knowledge through your experience, experimentation, and spiritual growth. There is no easier way. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 48 I 471. You have to do it, no one can do it for you. You cannot escape, or circumvent universal TNTT.H or fundamental principles, you can ignore them, but only at the cost of personal progress and upward. W1 It is lost. The requirements for spiritual growth on the path of knowledge and the requirements for awareness and functionality in NPMR are similar and related. It is the dropping of ego and material attachment that produces the high signal-to-noise ratios required for being sentient in NPMR. See Chapter 4, Book 3. Spiritual knowledge and paranormal ability do not have to occur together, making that connection depends on your interest, focus, and intent, but on the path of knowledge, they often are intertwined. On the paths of service and surrender, paranormal abilities may or may not be encountered. Spiritual knowledge and paranormal ability are not opposite sides of the same coin, but rather mutually supportive and strnngly related activities. Paranormal ability is an available byproduct of the path of knowledge that you can choose to ignore. Though quality consciousness and paranormal abilities often occur together like families and children, they are not logically dependent on each other, and though normally related, each can exist separately. For the sake of completeness, RT should be mentioned. There are other less consistent and less controllable ways to gain a spectic, as opposed to general access to all paranormal ability, but these are not directly on the path to big toe understanding and consequently will not be discussed. Focusing on, or being attached to, paranormal abilities will halt, retard, or degenerate spiritual progress as well as degrade the abilities themselves. Thus, the potential for great misuse is self-correcting, as is an interest in doing paranormal demonstrations or UX for science or curious individuals. It is not only a waste of time, as described previously, but is also self-limiting, a drag on your energy and personal progress. A good performer, accurate and consistent, will perform only on his own terms, which may or may not require uncertainty, and may not stay a good performer, or remain interested, for long. A marginally interested subject makes it difficult for the experimenter to produce the precision, consistency, and repeatability required by objective science. Exceptions exist to this rule of diminishing returns in parapsychological experiments, but they are rare. A difficult-to-manage psi performer is not necessarily covering up a lack of ability with demanding crankiness. Experimenters create a difficult situation for everyone by requiring non-physical phenomena behave as physical phenomena. Trying to UAP non-physical phenomena in a physical. 472 I My Big Toe I A closer look at psi phenomena, NPMR, and U. Bottle is problematical at best. Remember Curly and Larry trying to find and study the non-physical with a physical microscope? That doesn't work. Another related problem that makes our traditional scientific analysis of psi phenomena difficult to achieve is that demands of performance, repeatable and measurable as required by scientific methodology, tend to involve, tug at, the ego of the subject who wants, is willing, to demonstrate his or her ability. A desire or need to perform will usually increase the noise, which lowers signal to noise, which produces a failure to perform, psychological impotence. Thus, the best performers, perhaps the only great performers, are those not particularly interested in performing, or those unwilling to perform. Again, exceptions to this rule of uncooperative competency may exist from time to time, but they are rare. You might become an advanced scientist by reading and studying books, but do not expect to develop an advanced consciousness, become spiritually adept, by studying books. 1 Hanging out with a spiritual master, you have low be it, live it, expense it, and subjectively interact with it. There is no easy process, shortcut, or technical solution. PMR actions alone, studying psi phenomena, following meditation techniques, reading books, believing anything, will not open NPMR to you unless you experience spiritual growth and decrease the entropy of your consciousness. And if you try in your mind, like a flatlander, to force NPMR to conform to the form, function, and properties of PMR, science, or philosophy, or 3D space-time reality, you will, like traditional contemporary scientists, be haplessly and hopelessly ing to force the proverbial NPMR camel through the eye of a PMR needle. The experiences you need to grow the qualia of your consciousness happen you every day. What you need to learn to evolve your non-physical being is not a secret that is hidden from your view. It is your effort, direction, and intention that determine how you utilize, embrace, or shun the available opportunities, experience, and information. Being open-minded and willing to personally experiment as well as expend considerable effort is the only way to make serious progress along the path of knowledge. Because personal experimentation is often subjective, not the stuff group science is traditionally made of, it requires a commitment to continue working and learning until you have developed enough knowledge and understanding to produce objective results that can be validated. Substantial progress requires a substantial commitment, like the commitment takes get through college and graduate school along with the commitment required to become an accomplished musician. Everybody can do it, but not everybody will do it. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 48 I 473. I think at this point it might be useful for you to develop a more concrete sense of NPMR. This short aside will offer a description of NPMR and its inhabitants that may help you see NPMR within a broader, more solid perspective. Life forms in NPMR seem to be much more varied and abundant than they are in PMR. Not all entities inhabiting NPMR are sentient, some are elemental. The good, the bad, and the ugly, and the beautiful, all exist there. There is violence and peace, rip-offs and guilts. You can get hurt, self-inflicted or by the actions of others, or even killed, though it is very unlikely there are strict rules regulating violence. Death is by disassociation or the loss of your internal organization. Your identity is dissolved if your energy is reduced to a maximum entropy state approximating the final state predicted by the second law of thermodynamics. Think of degaussing a floppy disk. Death of an entity is exceedingly rare. If it should happen to you, you would cease to exist in that particular dimensioned reality as well as in other related realities. Your defining code and memory, once hopelessly scrambled, is deleted from the simulation. Your current individuated consciousness is shelled as part of a historical record, last saved file, but you are no longer part of an active actualizing interactive reality. You no longer evolve within that reality. You are gone. You could theoretically be reconstituted from the historical record, but I have never seen that happen and suspect that it is rarer than rare. It would be the big cheese's call and entirely dependent upon the circumstances of your demise. There are only a few circumstances where rats and anti-rats are allowed, by the rules, to destroy each other permanently. Unfortunately, sometimes NPMR rules are broken just as the laws of your state and nation are sometimes broken in PMR. Rule breakers are sometimes caught and must pay the price, and sometimes they get away with it. As far as I know, only the big cheese can execute a capital punishment for specific offenses. There are no lawyers, You plead your own case, all your actions and motivations are transparent. Every action and event, information or energy transfer, is stored in memory, and consequently, exactly what happened and why it happened is always available for post-event analysis. The truth cannot be effectively hidden, lies are always counterproductive. Other NPMRs are generally not as structured, peaceable, friendly, productive, or safe as NPMRN. In NPMRN there are lots of parasites, males, females, neuters, bullies and social workers. There is unnatural death and employment, but no natural death or taxes. No one grows old, only more or less knowledgeable, powerful, loving, caring, balanced, compassionate, humble, wise, fearful, needy, greedy, violent, vicious, egotistical, controlling, or manipulative. Among sentient beings, there is a much greater range in quality than there is in PMR. Beings and other objects in NPMRN are individuated consciousness energy and have associated bodies or forms of various shapes and sizes. The experiential perception of these non-physical bodies is defined by the rule set that lays down the laws of 474 I. My big toe. A closer look at psi phenomena, NPMR, and U. Being and interaction within NPMR, NPMR physics. For example, within one sensory view, one specific query of a subset of the NPMR database within TBC, of the non-physical parts of physical beings and objects, there are variations in apparent density soft forms. Denser is associated with dimmer awareness, higher entropy, and higher ego and fear content. From a different sensory view, different query tilter applied to the same subset of the NPMR database, denser indicates a higher probability of being manifested or maintaining manifestation within the physical. Within this view, primarily working with the subset of data that describes and specifies the transition region between the non-physical and physical, the denser the energy appears, the more solid the object seems to be. More non-physical M requires or stores, more potential non-physical E, as in E equals MC2, and requires more force, focused mental energy with intent, to modify its present state relative to its extant dimensional container, as in F equals Ma. In other words, sharply focused mental energy applied by intent, F, can modify the inertia, density, coherence, or persistence, M, of a thought form by constraining the dimension in which it can be extant as a function of time. In PMR, our dimensional container is spacetime as defined by the spacetime rule set, thus F modifies the existency of M by constraining, defining, its 30 posit ion as a function of time to a particular set of values. The two equations in the previous paragraph represent two rules within our PMR's spacetime rule set that provide a rough idea of the more general rules that apply within NPMR. In both realities, inducing change is a force meets inertia, resistance to change, type of phenomenon. The visual appearances of non-physical mass delineated bodies and various energy densities and probability densities within NPMR are the results and consequences of the NPMR rule set, which defines causality in NPMR and the particular way the viewer interprets the information received. As in PMR, it takes effort and training to ensure that one's personal interpretation of the data, experience, is not biased, is independent of collection methodology, is not an artifact of limited awareness, and does not modify the content of the data. The form of the data, how the data are internalized into personal experience, is subject to individual interpretation and therefore not particularly important. The content, message, or meaning of the data, however, is the same for everyone with a clear unbiased mental connection. Big truth is universal, one's experience of it is always personal. Why is everybody yawning and getting up to go get a snack at the same time? Alright, I promise, no more technoid blather about forces and inertia, let's get back to basics. You're out cruising NPMR and see a visual representation of a subset of non-physical matter that is attached to, or a part of, a particular physical PMR entity. If this non-physical matter-energy data thing has the appearance within NPMR of greater density, it would mean it has a higher expectation value, less uncertainty, of manifesting as part of that PMR physical entity. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 48 I 475. A specific example might help. If the non-physical aspects of a brain tumor appear to be very dense, that tumor either has, or is in the process of, manifesting physically. The greater the apparent energy density of a non-physical entity, incipient tumor, the more energy per unit time that is required to significantly affect or modify the expectation of that object manifesting into physical reality. Again, tumors that appear very dense when viewed from a non-physical perspective have a higher probability of being actualized in PMR and are much more difficult, require more energy, to dissipate. Why would anyone want to dissipate the non-physical part of a physical or pre-physical tumor? In Section 4 we will discover that physical reality is a secondary manifestation wholly dependent upon its primary non-physical source. The implication is that tumors dissipated within the non-physical will automatically dissipate within the physical as well. Having said that, let me also say that meddling with the natural results of the PMR learning lab, purposely modifying expectation values, is not always a good thing. The application of great power must be tempered with great wisdom. Think of the apparent density of non-physical energy as having the combined qualitative properties of persistence and inertia, staying power, resistance to change, heaviness, and the ability to survive and persist under the duress of external forces. Within realities where energy appears most dense, the PMRJ is where change is relatively slow, steady and smooth, existence is relatively simple, basic, and stable, and interactions between sentient beings are relatively inelastic, viscous and sticky. This description of the non-physical matter or non-physical mass that visually appears to define the boundaries and make up the bodies of all entities, sentient and non-sentient, in terms of energy density, persistence, and inertia is greatly simplified. I am describing only a minute piece of the perception mechanisms available within NPMR, the set of queries and filters that can be applied to the data within TBC and EBC. What we are talking about is a rule set that defines the properties, quality, and limitations of our perception of the interactions of beings and objects with other beings and objects within NPMR. The SEER rules that define how we perceive the possible record sets that are the result of our query, as well as rules that define the properties, form, and content limitations of transferable information and that define the allowable energy transfers, interactions, between players. The different views that I spoke of above are like looking at the same body or body part with the unaided eyes, an X-ray, a CAT scan, a thermogram, or a sonogram. Each view requires its own skilled interpretation before data can be converted to useful information. It is even more like looking at the same database through several different query filters. Trying to view or understand a more general system from the perspective of a highly constrained less general subset of that system is always as difficult as it is easy to do the opposite. Fully gaining the broader perspective of a low entropy consciousness. 476 My Big Toe a closer look at psi phenomena, NPMR, and U. Than NPMR makes understanding and optimizing the experience of PMR almost trivial. To such a consciousness, life in PMR becomes transparent and simple, rewarding and fun, productive and meaningful. The amazing maze becomes a wonderfully exciting and fun challenge that becomes easier and easier as it delivers an endless supply of exquisite cheese. I know that much of what I have described is next to impossible for many to understand because it is not possible to have a sense of the specifics of what I am talking about without direct first-hand experience in NPMR. Nevertheless, even if you have no direct experience of NPMR, I am hopeful that you will capture a flavor, an idea, an intuitive sense of what interactions within NPMR are like. They are similar to interactions in PMR, but with a wider, less limited access to information and a different set of social and physical rules, international law, local law, and physics. That's all. In order to build new concepts, there is no other construction methodology except stretching existing concepts and metaphors beyond their current use, beyond their common applicability. That is why transcending paradigms is exceptionally difficult. You must, by definition, start with inadequate conceptual tools for the job and somehow develop the necessary perspective that necessarily lies beyond simple linear extrapolation. You must combine a creative synthesis of old ideas with inspired intuition to find a new paradigm, which is nothing less than a new, more complete, more functional, bigger picture of reality, a more profitable organization of the available data. To get a glimmer of understanding of NPMR science, you need a more general concept of mass than most of us are used to. I realize that non-physical mass sounds both oxymoronic and just plain moronic, but it conveys the qualitative sense of what I am trying to explain better than any other words I can think of. For example, this concept implies that physical bodies exhibit a greater inertia or resistance to energetic, mental energy directed by conscious intent, change than non-physical bodies. It also implies that this fact is the result of how the various rule sets define and constrain the interactions of consciousness within and between each reality subset or dimension. Think of rule sets as data filters that define your energetic interaction with the data. You may have read privileges only, or be allowed to read, write, and modify. For those with no first-hand experience in NPMR, no experience with database queries, and have long forgotten basic physics, what I explained above will no doubt seem vague, arcane, and hopelessly opaque. I also know that most readers are drifting along in a similar lack of NPMR experience boat. Not to worry, you are not hopelessly lost, all I want you to. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 48 I 477. Take away from this discussion is a sense that NPMR, like PMR, is a structured, rule-based, objective, causal reality and that its physics is a superset of PMR physics. I want you to get at least a vague sense that the rules, and the beings, objects, and energy that must obey those rules in NPMR are similar to those in PMR but more general, more things are allowed, the evolutionary process has more degrees of freedom, and the possibilities of existence in the form of individuated consciousness are less constrained. In Section 4, Rule Sets, and how they define the experience we perceive as reality, both physical and non-physical, are discussed in detail. Think you get the picture. We apparently physical beings are very dense, without a doubt, we are among the densest beings within NPMRNL. That sense of the word dense fits like a glove, doesn't it? Let's take a short break. I need to speak with the technical types for a moment, the rest can skip this aside and wait for us at its end, we will catch up with you there. Alright, the left-brainers in the reading audience need to come on over here, we need to talk. I understand from my undercover sources that some of the techies feel as though they have been left holding a bag full of unanswered questions. I am aware that my discussion has been quick and shallow. This is because I have purposely omitted much of the breadth as well as the detail that you detail types love to get your teeth into. This trilogy is not the place for that level of detail, it is already very long, places a considerable strain on a reasonable attention span, and is seriously challenged to keep you focused on the logical unfolding of core concepts. Too much detail too soon is almost always counterproductive. Recall that physical science books, basic physics for non-techies, that discuss ballistic trajectory dynamics will purposely neglect to mention atmospheric interactions, air friction or temperature and density variations, non-uniform gravitation, Coriolis effects, and ballistic dispersion because only a few people at the introductory level want to know that much about it or have the background to understand what the issues are. How and why these more precise considerations more accurately describe reality is not of interest. Most would much rather get the basic low-fidelity concepts so that they can approximately understand the major concepts without being subjected to the boring particulars that are left to the boring specialists. Nothing personal. That is simply how the majority of right-brained non-technical people feel about it. Scientifically and carefully exploring, experiencing, the larger reality of consciousness within the metaphysical disciplines of cosmology, ontology, and epistemology is something that most readers are prepared to deal with, have the tools or experience to. 478 My big toe a closer look at psi phenomena, NPMR, and you understand, only at the beginning or introductory level of explanation. Feeling that you could take a giant leap forward if you had a more detailed technical, mathematical description of the physics of NPMR. The NPMR boundary is an error of misplaced emphasis and understanding. That is not where it's at. Mathematical physics represents the logic, in symbolic form, of the little picture. We have shown repetitively that little picture understanding, logic and causality cannot lead to big picture understanding, logic and causality. Little picture logic can lead to a better understanding of only the little picture. You cannot pull an elephant out of an acorn, and you cannot logically derive the big picture from the little picture. Remember Curly and Larry searching for the invisible non-physical microscope? Metaphorically, the non-physical microscope is your mind, and equations cannot help you find it or evolve it. They may help you understand and manipulate NPMR, but putting that cart in front of your consciousness quality horse will not get you anywhere. All would be better served if you focus on and achieved personal solutions before focusing on and trying to achieve technical ones. First things first. Crawl, then walk, then run. I know that you want to run in the worst way because running is obviously superior to crawling or walking, but if you try to run before you are ready, you will simply fall flat on your face and probably come to the erroneous conclusion that running is impossible. That is a worse outcome than being frustrated because you are not able to run right now. Why? Because getting the horse far out in front of the cart by trying to run prematurely may permanently damage your ability to ever be ready to run. Hey, I tried it myself, running doesn't work. It's all a pilly of horsebucky. It is not only impossible, but dangerous as well. People who say they can run are delusional, nuts, or egotists trying to impress everyone else. Beware, don't listen to a word of it, trust me on this one, I have first-hand experience. Look at that black eye and bruised nose. I will never try to run again. Anybody who tries to run is either an idiot or a fool. 8-month-old humans sometimes feel like that, but they keep trying because the success of others within their physical reality is eventually undeniable. On the other hand, intellectuals who are committed to justifying their cultural beliefs occasionally become champions of denial in order to convince themselves that their ignorance, rather than their belief, is the delusion. Geez, those belief traps are amazing. They can transmute simple ignorance and incompetence into blind stupidity in a flash. Now that we have spotted that trap and set the bag of questions problem leading to it, let's join up with the others and get on with our exploration. That is it for the heart-to-heart, techie-to-techie talk. Take a deep breath and let it go. We are intentionally skimming across the top here. This is a survey course at the 101 level, not a postdoc dissertation. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 48 I 479. NPRVFRN is not a different place, separate from LMR. It is continuous, integrated, and one with PMR. PIVFR is a dependent subset of NPMRN, and it exists in, with, and by NPMRN. All beings in NPMRN are not space and time constrained. Space and time are local constructs within PMR and are direct artifacts of the space-time rule set. Every being in our PMR is extant in NPMRN, the converse is not true. Though you live, operate, and function in NPMRN as well as PMR, you may be unaware of it because of the constraints you place on the awareness of your consciousness. The ramifications of a continuous interrelated reality structure between PMR and 1PMR will be explored in Chapter 12, Book 3, where we discuss communications, time travel, teleportation, multiple bodies, getting along without your body, and a few other interesting subjects. These topics need to be deferred until later because we have not yet developed the conceptual base required for understanding them. Be patient, many interesting things lie ahead of us in subsequent chapters. To get the 1E2 quickly is equivalent to not getting there at all. 49. Section 3 Postlude. Hail, hardy readers! Thou art a stout, figuratively only, and sturdy bunch. 8. Why now you may be convinced that I enjoy torturing you, but chat's not true. The nature of reality is an extremely complex subject which is difficult to grasp because it ca11 be seen and understood onji from a big picture perspective that must necessarily appear wild a11d crazy when compared to your familiar little picture. Big steps or leaps forward in understanding always have and always will seem wild and crazy when first encountered from the viewpoint of the old perspective which is, by definition, built upon a less expansive knowledge. The revelations of modern relativity and quantum mechanics, the fact that solid physical mat.er is composed of atoms that are mostly empty space, and that our beloved Earth is not at the center of the universe were all seen as ridiculous absurdities existing on the delusional fringe before they were accepted by the mainstream. Successful explorations of consciousness, mind, and the larger reality must by necessity seem similarly absurd because they will conflict with the traditional ways of thinking about and defining reality. We humans, in general, know much less of what there is to know than we think we do. Given the depth and pervasiveness of the belief blindness that reflect the quality of our species at the dawn of the 21st century, if this big toe did not seem wild and was not difficult to understand, it could not possibly be correct. Many people feel that Western culture is slowly growing up, opening its collective mind, becoming more able and willing to take the longer end. 482 I My Big Toe I Section 3 Postlude. Broader view. Optimism and seeing ourselves through rose-colored glasses are two of our most pervasive cultural traits. JT is true that explorations of consciousness, mind, and the larger reality that remain strongly connected to our little picked-we belief systems have become somewhat more acceptable during the last 30 years. Unfortunately, the failure of such efforts to deliver profound insights has encouraged the commonly held belief that NC solution exists and that a scientific big toe is impossible. Significant theoretical progress seems unattainable, inaccessible, and forever beyond our reach because our thinking must be based upon traditional ways of defining reality in order to maintain at least marginal respectability and support from the center of power that dispenses research funds and credibility. Failure is assured by the requirement to use a proper, rational, and scientific exploration and analysis process which is, at its root, based upon the dogmatic belief that all reality must be physical. On day one this handicap, researchers may easily prove that something truly strange is going on, but they will never figure out what or why. This recipe for failure resembles a resolute decision to look for your misplaced car keys or sunglasses only in places that you have never been. Belief traps, dressed up as obvious truth, always make new big-picture concepts struggle for credibility against the prevailing social, scientific, or religious currents of assumed rationality. That is simply how it is, and how it will continue to be, for a very long time. When one is only a little fellow starting near the bottom of a long evolutionary ladder, as are most humans, big-picture perspectives are difficult to come by. LT is a designed-in feature of our larger reality that makes big truth appear to be an impenetrable mystery low the limited perspective of the average person, yet it is also a designed-in feature that a grand panoramic view of the whole is available to anyone who makes the effort to climb the mountain. Indeed, climbing the mountain is one gateway to the successful evolution and advancement of our individual being. For those wondering why opacity should be a designed-in feature, consider what your neighbors, co-workers, spouse, children, boss, mother, and mother-in-law might do to you if they knew how to manipulate you with their minds. It is better that they grow up first. I salute your curiosity, intellectual determination, and toughness. I am thankful that you are tolerant and hardy enough to have made it this far. To get to this point you have suffered the ravages of rat maze vertigo, ego deflation, belief trap withdrawal, and an annoying heart-to-heart talk from your Dutch uncle. You undoubtedly deserve to paste 4 more brightly glittering gold stars next to your name inside the front cover of this book. Book 2, Section 3, Chapter 49 I 483. Because my big toe is based upon a lifetime of personal experience and because it is very unusual, effectively communicating the perspective wherein that big picture makes sense to a broad range of individuals who may lack first-hand experience of the larger reality is an immensely difficult job. I hope that one have successfully met at least some significant part of that challenge. Unfortunately, whatever I'll fail to meet inevitably becomes a challenge to you, something you must figure out for yourself. Thanks for coming along on this trek. I hope you will continue on the journey with me through at least the next two sections where the mechanics of NPMR and PMR are more fully explained. In section 4 we will explain how we can have the cute and cuddly physical bodies that we love to indulge and at the same time be nothing other than consciousness. You will solve the mind-matter dichotomy and delve deeper into the nature of experience and the phenomenon of digital consciousness. Along the way, we will demonstrate that PMR physics, our hard-headed little picture science, can be derived from the same two assumptions that we have used to construct this big TOE. Showing that PMR physics is contained within, and can be derived from, my big TOE is, from the PMR point of view, the one and only test a candidate TOE must pass to lay claim to the title of a true TOE. That is a fair and necessary test. A successful TOE must explain and contain PMR physics as well as paranormal phenomena, intuition, mind, time, and more. We will accomplish all of that before you reach the end of my big TOE. The deriving of PMR physics is accomplished in section 4 with a little help from our friends. Come on along for the tour through Sec.ion 4, and see how the individual concepts we have discussed thus far begin to pull together into a more rational and understandable whole. Section 4. Solving the mystery. Mind, matter, energy, and experience. Introduction to Section 4. In this section we are going to examine the origins and circumstances of physical existence. I will explain how PMR, at its most fundamental level, is a product of consciousness and provide a clear understanding of the connection between mind and matter. By the time you reach Book 3, it will seem more logical and less strange that matter is an experience of mind and that physical existence is a virtual interactive experience designed to facilitate consciousness evolution. A TOE, by definition, must explain all the facts that are known to exist as well as new facts that belong to a bigger, more complete picture. My big TOE is no different. It must subsume all present knowledge including PMR science. As we all know, additional science is nowhere close to producing a credible big TOE that explains intuition, mind, consciousness, and the paranormal, as well as the normal physics of PMR. PMR scientists and their egos deal with RJ1EIR inability to see a bigger picture by denying the existence of what they cannot explain. Facts to the contrary are either ignored or attacked as an unacceptable heresy that offends the obviously correct beliefs of the current scientific establishment. There always seems to be a plentiful supply of self-righteous scientists who spare no venom in defense of the sacred dogmas of contemporary science. From their limite view, PMR science and truth are synonymous and define each other. Do you see the parallels here? The last 4 sentences in the preceding paragraph apply equally well to religion and culture as they do to science. That should not be so surprising at the bottom level of their belief-based foundations. Traditional science, culture, and religion share the same genetic material. That is why their members and their institutions exhibit many of the same individual and organizational traits. In the West. 488 My Big TOE Introduction to Section 4. Science and culture have made an alliance of mutual support, while in the Middle East and East, religion and culture have allied themselves. Together they provide a throne from which the human ego reigns supreme. Discovering a more profitable bigger picture, as well as raising the average quality of the human spirit, is a job that necessarily is left entirely up to you. We the people remain objectively clueless because our awareness is far removed from an integrated holistic view of reality. We the people remain subjectively clueless because our belief systems forbid the truth. Having been artificially separated, our objective and subjective cluelessness feed and maintain each other. There are 2 conditions that a successful big TOE must meet. First, A successful big TOE cannot be logically inconsistent or conflict with known facts. It must explain and contain, be a superset of, what is presently known. Second, a successful big TOE must appear to be logically inconsistent and conflict with traditionally accepted beliefs and the opinions based upon those beliefs, pseudo-facts. It could not possibly be a correct big TOE, or even a major step toward a new big TOE, if it did not dramatically conflict with our limited little pick-me belief-based culture, science, and knowledge. Because our traditional science believes that the little picture is all there is, it restricts its investigation of the big picture, epistemology, ontology, cosmology, quantum physics, evolution, metaphysics, physics, consciousness, mind, psi effects, and intuition, to little picture phenomena. Traditional science is placed in the hopeless role of expecting the big picture to be contained within, and be derivable from, the little picture. Looking to extract the big picture from the little picture is a totally illogical approach and will produce nothing but frustration and the apparent conformation that either the big picture does not exist or it is beyond objective knowing. This approach T0 reality is analogous T0 trying to ascertain the properties of the larger forest by interrogating the moss growing on a tree, or perhaps expecting to understand modern microprocessor 1 design and manufacture by studying a chunk of raw silicon ore. The door of your mind must be opened at least a crack before you are likely to notice the passageway to a more complete conscious awareness and step through it to investigate what lies on the other side. If you have the courage to seek the truth, the My Big TOE trilogy is meant to facilitate the opening of such a crack in the belief barrier constructed by the ego mind. A primary goal of My Big TOE is to help you get your big toe, or perhaps your entire foot, wedged in your mind's door to prevent it from slamming closed before you are able to explore the route. Book 2, Section 4, Chapter 50 I 489. Nature of your consciousness. This is more difficult than it first appears because you are easily seduced by your cultural, scientific, religious, and personal beliefs to seek the habitual comfort and refuge in the safe bliss that ignorance creates. Delusion, like a drug addiction, is a habit that is difficult to break. You might think that separating fact from opinion is not difficult. We all think we know how to perform that operation reasonably well. Nevertheless, it is obvious that many people are not especially good at it, but we, you, and I, truly know how to separate BS from truth. It is not that difficult because, well, we just know. We have been around the block a few times and are experienced and perceptive enough to know what is genuine and what isn't. Separating fact from fancy is intuitively obvious. Our BS detectors are sensitive and finely tuned. We know how people think, what they want, and the games they play. It is difficult for anyone to pull anything over on us. We are not naive or easy targets for new age hustlers or status quo promoting traditionalists. Everybody feels like that, including teenagers. It is a pile of belief trap crap that you should be careful not to fall into. The reason that discriminating truth from falsity is extraordinarily difficult is, 1. You are unaware of what you don't know, and 2. It is your ego's solemn job, remember, your intellect is a servant of the ego, to convince you that your belief-based pseudo-knowledge is actually real knowledge. Because of invisible ignorance, the needs, wants, and desires of a slick ego, and a self-justifying intellect, your apparently solid grasp of either big truth or little truth is likely to be delusional. There are exceptional people who see things clearly, but except for you and me, I don't know any of them. In a CU1 lure like ours, where scientific, religious, and cultural beliefs forcefully constrain and dominate most intellectual effort and essentially define the boundaries of each individual's local reality, it is more difficult to think out of the box and to separate the FACL from the beliefs and opinions that masquerade as facts than you might imagine. Of the two conditions mentioned above that a successful big TOE must meet, I have the second one, high strangeness, well in hand. In this section, the remaining gaps in the first condition, containing PMR physics as a subset, will be addressed. Ladies, gentlemen, and others, do not panic. I promise not to drag you through a physics class. I know that physics first overwhelms and then perhaps amazes you, then it annoys you and puts you into a deep sleep. This is NOL intended as a sleepy time book. Trust me, you will be able to follow every detail without going back low school to pick up those boring science and math classes that you so cleverly avoided. 490 My Big TOE Introduction to Section 4. Deriving some of the basic rules or concepts of PMR physics from a consideration of the properties of consciousness reality cells has been accomplished. I have only to point to it, not drag you through it. I will, however, provide the understanding and structure, model, with which you can combine physics and metaphysics concepts into a fully integrated big picture. Let's begin by formulating some of the most obvious questions. How does one explain our physical existence and our physical experience within PMR, especially if we are nothing other than a clever configuration of AUM's wholly non-physical consciousness? How come we appear stuck in this little picture 3D space-time PMR with these cute but needy physical bodies? What is a nice big picture free will awareness unjade, FWAU, like you doing in a little picture place like PMR? Why is it that a critical mission to improve the quality of our consciousness first requires that we dumb ourselves down to some clueless space-time creature with a perishable body that continually needs to be fed? Is this physical existence an existential joke, punishment for eating apples without permission, or is there some logical reason why the severe limitations and inherently painful struggle of the physical human is actually an optimized and necessary configuration for learning? Hint. Nod your head up and down to that last one. If you are patient and hang tough with me a while longer, I will eventually answer all these questions and several more. Within this section, mind, matter, energy, and experience, I will attempt to make the PMR connection by explaining the implications of my big toe to our everyday experiences here on good old plain L Earth, which is somewhere within PLVIR, which is somewhere within OS, which is somewhere within NPMRN, which is somewhere within TBC, which is somewhere within PJ/IIR, which is somewhere within the consciousness and imant of AUM, which is apparently, but not actually, infinial, which is about 2 steps beyond what a self-limited mind can see, even on a clear day.